Blakeman has a few comments he'd like to make. I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to him.
Okay, I've been advised in a nice way that I need to be more dynamic in my speaking so that everybody can hear me. So can all the people in the back row hear me now? Okay. All right. You were advised Monday night that the rebuttal procedures, list of interested parties entitled to make closing statements, and a list of exhibits will be put on the county website and available on Tuesday. I was advised earlier this afternoon that attempts to upload this material were made, but the county website was full and out of memory. I wonder why. The county attempted to expand the website and was able to do so, and I think the material became available at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. I have brought extra copies of the rules and the evidence, the list of closing argument people, and they'll be available at break or at the end of the hearing tonight if you'd like to pick one up. Right? I also have a comment about lawyer objections. First of all, lawyer objections should be directed to the attention of the chair, not to each other. And I would ask that, again, whatever objection you have, make it to the chair. And I would ask that the lawyers allow each other to complete their objections so that we all have an understanding of what is being said, what is being objected to.
All right. Real quick this evening, before we get going with the rebuttal, we're going to take care of a few things that we had left over. The first issue we had, we heard some conversation last meeting about the Marcus Meyer testimony. Given that conversation and conversation with counsel for our side, we are prepared to rule on that particular testimony. I'll read from this. The applicant has requested all testimony and exhibits that were submitted by Marcus Meyer on March 18, 2015 be stricken. The exhibits in question are UCLC exhibits number 130, 131, and 132, and the Zoning Board of Appeals reserved ruling on testimony and exhibits submitted by this witness. UCLC exhibits number 131 and 132 will not be admitted into the record of proceedings, and any reference to these exhibits in the record will be stricken. Furthermore, certain pages of UCLC exhibit number 130 will not be admitted into the record. Specifically, pages or slides 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, 28, and 36, and any testimony involving the information set forth on these pages or slides will be stricken. The remainder of UCLC exhibit number 130 will be admitted into the record for consideration by the ZBA. All right, that's to take care of the Meyer testimony. With regard to a motion to reconsider filed by UCLC, Mr. Lugan's, he asked us to reconsider some evidence that was presented by Dassow, specifically Exhibit 6, and Schlegel, Exhibit 8. Exhibit 4. Mr. Blazer, you did not respond to this particular motion, is that correct?
I did not respond to the writing, no, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. For the sake of time, why don't you, are you prepared to maybe give me a minute or two response to that, or do you have any?
I will in just a second, as soon as I can find my notes on that one.
Okay. I guess while you're looking for notes, Mr. Lucan, is there anything that you would like me to consider regarding that? Give me your kind of your 2-minute summary on this motion.
No, Mr. Chairman, we have submitted everything.
All right.
I think one of them was Ms. Dassow's Exhibit 7, which was an exchange of emails between her and some folks at some lifeline organizations. I had two comments on that. Number one, it was purported when this was presented that this was a follow-up to this is a portion of the Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 19, which was invented quite a long time ago. And it was a package of communications from Invenergy to various emergency services providers with our draft emergency response plan, requesting comments to that plan. The particular one to OSF St. Francis Life Flight was dated October 9, 2014. It's part of our Exhibit 19. And it was to Mr. Steve Cornillud, C-O-R-N-I-L-L-A-U-D, Director of Operations at OSF St. Francis. None of the communications in DASO Exhibit 7 are between her and Mr. Cornillud. They're between her and other people. So that's the first issue. The second issue is the email that starts this email thread is dated October 28th. And Ms. Dasso says, a third massive wind farm in our county, and there are 3 other potential projects in the works. And none of that's in this record. So for those reasons, I don't think DASO 7 is appropriate. The other one was the exchange of emails, and I apologize, I don't remember the Slagle exhibit number for that. There was an exchange of emails that purported to be between Mr. Slagle, John Slagle, and Mr. Schindeldecker in Michigan.
Facebook messages.
Facebook messages, excuse me. I'm not on Facebook, so I don't know what you call it. But in any event, there was an exchange of communications between Mr. Slagle and purportedly between the two of them. Mr. Lukenhans has moved to reconsider your grant of my objection to those communications. But right at the very beginning, after I objected, Mr. Slagle said, I'm willing to skip these Facebook posts if that's fine with you guys. So he waived any objection to my objection. Number two, the basis for your granting my objection was less about whether or not Mr. Schindeldecker is going to testify. The basis for your sustaining my objection was, is Mr. Schindeldecker a doctor himself? Mr. Slagle said I have no clue. I pointed out the record reflects that he's a 53-year-old industrial designer, and you said, all right, so he can't self-diagnose with authority. That was the basis for your granting my objection. So that's all I ask.
Okay.
I have something to say about it.
All right. We have looked through this, obviously, this motion to reconsider and I guess directed all right. I think with regard to these, I think we have set precedents in these hearings. So I there again with the council and asked them to consider this as precedents have been set. They have prepared for me a statement. We'll go through it. Attorney for UCLC has filed a motion to reconsider involving Megan Dassow, exhibit number 7, and certain pages of John Schlegel, exhibit number 4. The Dassow exhibit involved an email conversation concerning the impact of wind farms on lifelike. Excluded from the John Schlegel exhibit were pages 6 and 7 involving Facebook comments and a photograph and Facebook conversation above the heading of summary on page 8 of the exhibit involving Carrie Schindeldecker. The motion to reconsider and allow admission of Megan Dassow exhibit number 7 and pages 6, 7, and a portion of page 8 of the John Schlegel exhibit is denied. With regard to the remaining Megan Dassow exhibits, exhibit number 1 is not admitted and excluded, but exhibits number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8 are admitted into the record. Certain pages of Megan Dassow exhibit number 9 will not be admitted into the record, specifically pages 5, 6, 7, 8, 15, and 17, and any testimony involving the information set forth on these pages will be stricken. The remainder of Megan Gassauer's exhibit number 9 will be admitted into the record for consideration by our board. Concerning the remaining John Schlegel exhibits, exhibit number 2, 3, 3A, 5, and 8 are admitted into the record for consideration by our board, except for the pages set forth above, which are excluded. The remainder of John Schlegel exhibit number 4 is admitted into the record. All right? All right.
A comment concerning John Schlegel's exhibit number 4. For purposes of response, the pages from the exhibit do not have numbers on them. For purposes of response, the exhibit has been numbered, pages 1 through 8 correspond, so that we can specifically indicate where or which pages are excluded.
This is title page number 1.
What?
Title page would be number 1.
Yes.
For those that didn't hear, the title page to John Schlegel exhibit, the first page of that is 1. All right. I believe that's everything we need to take care of housekeeping-wise with that.
If I may, for the record,
Yes.
I assume that the remainder of the motion to reconsider, which is to strike exhibits, Pleasant Ridge exhibits 2, 5, and I believe there was one other, I'm going off memory, is denied. Is that the fact? So we're allowing co-bank hearsay, but not Ms. Dassler's hearsay. Okay, thank you.
One final thing then as a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Since you granted my motion with respect to UCLC 131, which is the letter from Mr. Ambrose, I would renew my objection to that same letter that was in Mr. Hartke's presentation. I had objected to it at the time that he presented it. You had at that time overruled it. Now that you have granted my motion to strike that letter, I think it's inappropriate to allow it to remain in the record from Mr. Hartke, who again basically did the same thing that Mr. Meyer tried to do, get the Ambrose letter in when Mr. Ambrose is not testifying.
All right. I'm going to deny that on the basis that for the Hartke situation, that was the specific farm that was reported to, or that was spoken about in that letter that he lived by. He had firsthand knowledge of that particular wind farm, the California Great Wind Project. All right. With that, we'll go ahead and just take off where we left off.
Just so we're clear on what we just did with Meyer, and I may have to go through this with Mr. Hankard at the break. As we discussed on Monday, obviously, I had him prepared to respond to all of Meyer who didn't know what you were going to grant or deny. He's probably still prepared to do that. I think we're going to leave that for the tail end of his presentation, so maybe at a break, we can put our heads together, figure out what he needs to respond to and what he doesn't, now that you've ruled out that motion. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll tell you what. Here's the written language of that I read.
Thank you.
You're welcome to that. That way you can, if it would be easier, I mean, you left it an actual break. Would you like to have somebody else come up and have Mr. Hankard review that? Whatever works.
No, no, we can keep going. That's fine. But there's a natural break for him responding to Meyer, so
Very good.
I think we'll be okay. Just a second. If I may proceed, okay. Just to remind you, you're still on the road.
Thank you.
All right. All right, let's go back to the Cape Bridgewater study. We left off with you talking about examples of absence of correlation between wind turbine operations and these reported sensations that this study is about. Is there additional information in the study that, in your opinion, confirms an absence of that correlation?
Yeah, to be honest, the study is, the way I view it, just riddled with a lack of correlation. I'm kind of shocked that people are using that word that usually has a statistical connotation where you've actually done an analysis of the data set and the trend is what you expect. That's correlation. That is not what Cape Bridgewater did in any way, shape, or form. And that study was unique in that it started with the diaries of the residents. Instead of going out and measuring noise levels and saying, well, do these levels meet a certain threshold, they started with the diaries of the residents. And that's a noble pursuit. I have no problem with that. And they tried to correlate those diaries when these people felt these sensations. They correlate them with vibration, with noise, and with the operational data of the turbines. Were they running, were they not running? In page 75, the study says there's no correlation of the results versus the sensation or vibration, and limited correlation to noise. So right away he's saying with regard to dBA, dBc, 1,000 hertz, any of that stuff, there was no correlation with what these people reported feeling and with what he measured. So then he looked at the power output of the wind turbines. Were they on when these people felt sick and off when they didn't? Or I should use the word sick, sensation. Page 212, when plotting the power output of the wind farm from the initial assessment, could not correlate the measurement results with observations, except for showing changes in power output that the wind farm was associated with higher sensation. So in other words, it didn't really match when the turbines were on and off, but they thought that they noticed a pattern of when the turbines changed operation, people reported a higher sensation. So then he tries to determine if that theory of his is correct. So he goes on to say that they think that there's higher sensation when the turbines are seeking to start, or there's change, or when the wind speed is 12 meters per second or greater. I submit to you that's like the whole range, that's everything. We've seen people report sensations when their turbines were off, and he's saying when they seek to start, when they're going up, and then when they're up. I mean, it's all over the map. Again, to try to, he goes and he takes these diaries, and there were 522 entries. And he says that 194, so roughly half, fell into the wind farm operation sensation hypothesis. So right off the bat, only half of his data even falls into the theory. That's not a lot of correlation when half of your data doesn't make sense. Then he says that, so then he boiled it down. He said, let's look at just the 81 times when people reported a 5, when they had strong sensations. 50 of those, he said, he couldn't use because of equipment issues, it was too windy, or the turbines weren't operating. In other words, he got a bunch of 5s when the turbines weren't operating. That does not speak to me to correlation in any way, shape, or form. So he winds up with 31 ultimate diary entries out of 522 that he then looks at. And he takes the infrasound sonic level. I believe that's what Cooper is saying, that it's about the infrasound. It's not about 1,000 hertz, it's not about dBA, it's about this thing he calls WTS, wind turbine signature, which is the infrasonic level. And he plots those. And the thing about it is those levels are below, if you remember back to my presentation, there's a standard threshold hearing. And a researcher named Salt has theorized that there could be another way for this infrasound to get to us. And his threshold is 20 or 30 decibels below the standard threshold. Well, these levels in Cape Bridgewater are another 20 below that. I mean, they're 50 dB below the hearing threshold. It's just hard for me to understand how that is correlation. May 5th at 2 p.m. and May 8th at 4 a.m., these were all times when the plant was off. People reported a 5. That is not correlation. I don't know what he means by correlation. And finally, at this one of the houses that was not a sensitive person, you know, on May 8th at noon, they reported a 5. The plant was off. So, to answer your question, I do not see any sign of correlation in the Gate Bridgewater study.
Thank you. You're aware that certain others, and they were introduced by Mr. Hayes, Hayes Exhibits 2 and 3, are letters which purport to be congratulatory letters from Rand, Ambrose, Schomer, Hessler. What's your response to those statements?
Yeah, I read these. So a number of acquisitions, many of which I know personally, wrote to Mr. Cooper and congratulated him. Now, Mr. Rand says, and he uses the word correlation, the correlation of sensation to wind turbine tone level brings wind turbine acoustics right to the door of medical science. I don't know if Rob looked at the data. I really don't, because where he thinks that there's correlation, for all the reasons I just explained to you, I have no idea. I really don't. Dr. Schomer and George Hessler, again, these are people I know, they say the results are that there are a cause and effect relationship between turbine power output and subject response. Cooper basically said, no, there wasn't. He said there was no, we tried to correlate the response to the turbine output power and they couldn't find a pattern. The turbines that were off many times when these people reported a 5. That is not a cause and effect the way I see it. Finally, there was an acquisition from Canada, I believe, Thorne is his last name. Says the most intriguing part of this study is a set of conclusions dealing with a pattern of high sensitivity experienced by the residents with the wind farm in operation. Again, a pattern. There's no pattern. So I don't know if we're reading the same report.
What about Mr. Ambrose?
Mr. Ambrose made no specific comments that it was just kind of along the lines of congratulations, it was a big report and you did a good job, but there was nothing specific.
You're aware that Mr. Ambrose talked about how DBC criteria should be applied and the difference between DBC and DBA?
Yes, he has purported that DBC and that delta should be analyzed.
And what did Cooper say about that in the Cape Bridgewater study?
That he found absolutely no correlation between his results and DBC levels, nor did he find any correlation between his results and the difference between CN.
And was there a discussion in the report about increases in the DBA LEQ minus L95 level? First of all, if you could explain what that means.
Yeah, that's getting a little specific. It has to do with how much there's a change in the sound.
And when Cooper says those levels are not associated with the wind farm but are due to extraneous events, what does that mean?
Extraneous events in this case would be primarily the wind.
Not the turbines.
Not the turbines, right.
And that was Cooper's language.
Correct.
All right, I think we're finally done with Cape Bridgewater. You're aware that Dr. Punch, Jerry Punch, when he testified, talked about the WHO, the World Health Organization, outdoor and indoor corrections.
Yes.
First of all, could you explain what those outdoor to indoor corrections from the World Health Organization are?
Okay, so, you know, we tend to measure turbine noise outside. Yes, some studies like Cooper's get access to the houses inside. But the regulatory requirements in Illinois are outside criteria, so we tend to measure outside. But then when we want to talk about sleep disturbance, obviously people are inside. So you have to correct the levels to go from outside to inside. It's a fairly complicated process that involves the frequency of the source and the house and a number of other things. But the World Health Organization boiled it down and summarized it for us. And their summary is, it depends on whether or not you have your windows open or not. window's closed, it gets up about 20, 21. Does that answer your question?
It does. So, and going back, I guess I misrepresented something. Going back to the Cape Bridgewater study for a moment, did Cooper address the levels that he was finding indoors?
Well, yeah, I touched on that Monday night. One of the problems he had is it was so quiet inside that his equipment couldn't get down that low. I mean, they were measuring levels in the 20s, sometimes in the high teens DVA, which is extremely quiet.
And as far as those WHO standards are concerned, you're aware that they identify 30 dBA as the level below which there are no substantial biological effects?
Yes, that is the exact language.
Okay. Are there any authorities that have addressed this point about the outdoor levels versus the indoor levels that Mr. Punch talked about, and that obviously Cooper talks about?
Well, yeah, the subject of outside and inside levels comes up quite often on projects for the very reason that the WHO inside sleep disturbance threshold needs to be dealt with, needs to be addressed. So it comes up quite a bit. It came up recently in Ontario. There was a case where, again, it's kind of complicated, and Mr. McMurtry got into quoting inside, outside levels and got it mixed up. He didn't understand that he was referring to outside levels and talking about inside levels. So it comes up on a number of.
Is the Ontario decision you're referring to, Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 287, the decision in the plant and produce matter?
So the decision?
The decision in the plant and produce matter.
Yes, 287, that's correct.
And you're aware that Mr. McMurtry was one of the people that Mr. Punch relied on?
I believe he did, yes.
And do you have in your notes there what the Ontario Environmental Review Tribunal said about Mr. McMurtry's misunderstanding of the outside versus inside levels?
Objection, relevance. This is way beyond the scope of rebuttal. 287 was not allowed in, was not allowed to be discussed, and now we're going to go into specifics of the decision that was not allowed in the response period.
Well, if I could respond to that, Mr. Chairman, very briefly. I'll wait till you're done talking with that. Okay. Two things. Number one, the issue of inside-outside was discussed by both Mr. Punch, and it's addressed in the Cape Bridgewater report. Number two, the issue of Dr. McMurtry was likewise raised by Mr. Punch. He relied on him extensively both in his testimony and in his presentation. This opinion goes directly to the fact that part of the problem with McMurtry was that he had the outside levels confused with inside levels. So it is rebuttal. It's responding to evidence that was raised by at least two opposition witnesses. By the same one, it was Punch is the one who talked about Cape Bridgewater. So he talked about Cape Bridgewater, and he talked about McMurtry.
Can I respond to that, please? Dr. Punch's statements about Mr. McMurtry related specifically to a report he did that was not in Ontario. This is improper impeachment of Mr. McMurtry, who isn't here, that somehow in some other case he was disagreed with. We could bring in all the cases he was agreed with, but that's just not relevant. You know, can I finish, please?
Sorry, I apologize.
But that's not relevant either. None of it is relevant. It's not proper impeachment. It's not proper anything. That's not the issue before this board.
All right. If we didn't allow the 287 Pleasant Ridge exhibit, we obviously can't refer to it at this point. So any reference to McMurtry within that 287 will not be allowed. So I'll allow his objection.
Let's switch to a different topic, Mr. Hankard. Does the Cape Bridgewater report say anything on the issue of potential changes in regulations?
Yeah, it does. you know, again, these reports I gave Bridgewater, they're scientific studies, and people seem to want to take them much further than even their own authors.
Objection as to what other people want to do. That's not what we're hearing for. If he wants to testify as to something that was said, that's fine, but that's not what people, I don't even know what people means.
All right, we'll allow the objection again.
What does Mr. Cooper say about potential changes in regulation?
That this report should not be used as a basis for any change in regulation.
And that's executive summary, page Romanet 6, and page 219?
Yes.
Now, you are aware that some folks in this proceeding have suggested that compliance with statutory noise limits does not necessarily mean that there won't be health impacts from wind turbines, correct?
Yes.
You know what? I apologize, Mike. I didn't hear the end of the sentence. I apologize.
I'll read it again. It's in my book.
Thank you.
You're aware that some people in this proceeding have suggested that compliance with statutory noise limits does not mean that there won't be health impacts from wind turbines.
Yes, I have heard that.
All right. Have there been any studies done, particularly recently, that address the relationship between noise regulations and health?
Yes, yes. And so a group of researchers, primarily from my interest level, is Josh Leventhal from the United Kingdom, considered one of the best acquisitions worldwide, particularly with respect to wind turbines. He participated in a study recently that was published in Frontiers of Public Health. And what they did is they looked at the question of...
Hang on a second.
Sure.
For the record, what I've handed out is marked as Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 325.
So they wanted to know, are the current regulations, the ones that regulate audible sound, like the Illinois Pollution Control Board limits, or DBA limits that are in place across the country, are those limits sufficient to protect against the noise that is produced by wind turbines? In other words, is there anything special about wind turbine noise that is somehow not captured by today's regulations? So they went over worldwide regulations for audible sound, infrasound, low frequency sound, inside, outside. And case and time again, they conclude that if you limit, actually what they use, if you limit DBA, which is what is essentially limited here by the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations, then you protect for low frequency noise and infrasound. There's no special attribute about wind turbine sound that is somehow is not protected by the existing regulations.
Objection. Just glancing at this, there is nothing in here about, there are certain, it relates to USA, Oregon, USA, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And it talks about other countries. At no point in here does it talk about the state of Illinois and its regulations. We would ask that the testimony be stricken and that this exhibit not be allowed.
If I may, I think Mr. Hankard just answered that, but I can ask him a question which will answer it. If I may, Mr. Chairman, does this study address noise levels that are equivalent to the levels that are in Illinois?
Same objection. It's not an issue of levels. It's an issue of what are the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations.
Which
And are not limited to just noise level measurements.
Well, the first thing we're talking about here is whether or not we comply with the IPCB noise levels. And secondly, then, whether our compliance with those noise levels is protected with human health. That is what this study addresses.
And I guess I would ask the board, is Mr. Hankard somehow testifying as a human health expert, which I don't believe he is.
All right, Mr. Hankard, just as I quickly go through this, can you show me where I would find 1,000 hertz, 41 dB as the highest level in any of these studies?
This study does not point out 1,000 hertz. Illinois is a little unique in regulating on an octave band basis. Most countries or states limit on a dBA basis.
Okay, stop there.
I'll withdraw my objection. I just withdrew it.
Okay.
He just pointed out the difference. I don't need it.
Mr. Hankard, go ahead and continue.
Go ahead. Let me ask you one question. What is the equivalent dBA level that's established by the Illinois noise regs?
The way it works, again, as we know from talking to proceedings, that it's this 1,000 hertz band that kind of limits us. And so the end result of that is that the turbines in Illinois can produce about 45 dBA. That's really what it boils down to.
And does this study address 45 dBA?
Yes, this study addresses dBA limits and their ability to provide a reasonable regulation.
Turning to Mr. Hayes for a moment. On slide 13 of Mr. Hayes' presentation, which is his Exhibit 6, he said, another reason to vote no is the fact that the predicted ISO model's decibel values do not include sound increases due to amplitude modulation and resonance. Does the Berger-Rebuttal study address that issue?
It does. With regard to amplitude modulation, which that's a fancy word for the level goes up and down a little bit. Modulation means to change. And what this Berger-Rebuttal study, this Pleasant Ridge 235, makes a very interesting point. It says until noise is audible, the change in the level doesn't matter. You can't hear it. So you don't know if it's fluctuating. And I think that's a very important point. So, yes, turbines have a small amount of amplitude modulation, but if we're talking about infrasound and it's inaudible, that's immaterial.
All right, let's turn to a different topic. Someone introduced UCLC Exhibit 28, which was a submittal by Mr. Lamancusa, L-A-M-A-N-C-U-S-A, in the Highland Wind proceeding in Wisconsin. You're familiar with that?
Yeah, very.
Okay. Were you involved in that proceeding?
I was, yeah. I was the acoustical consultant in charge of, much as I am here, the prediction of noise and statement of compliance with regulations.
And do you agree with Mr. Lamancusa's statements in that submittal?
No, I did not agree with anything that Mr. Lamancusa brought to the table during that proceeding. First of all, his resume states that his sum total experience of being around or measuring wind turbines consists of 1 day. I've been around these things and measuring them months at a time, weeks at a time, over the course of years. So it seems a little bit like that his experience isn't up to what some of the things he said. For example, he tries to make the case that wind turbine emits sound and propagates out differently than other sources. And by virtue of the fact that our ISO model, which assumes it's a normal source, matches quite well with our measurements, just goes to show you that he's not right about that. It's just misinformation. And I quote page 8 of the document, the Exhibit 28. He says that ISO 9613 does not calculate noise levels based on scientific principles. I really have no idea what that means. This ISO 9613 was developed by engineers and acousticians. It was done to national and international standards, and it's all about science. So I don't know where Mr. Lamancusa was going on that one. And he asserts again that the ISO model does not predict appropriately. Again, with our validation of California ridge data, shown that it does a very good job of predicting what we're going to find in the field. Mr. Lamacousa actually cites a paper that I have cited in the Heinlein proceeding. It's by a man named Mr. Kaliski and Mr. Duncan. And Mr. Lamacousa says that he claims that Kaliski Duncan says that the ISO model underpredicts. But here's a quote from that very study. We found the best fit between model and monitored sound levels for this case, which is a wind turbine project, occurs when using ISO with no ground attenuation, which is exactly what we did. So, for many of those reasons, I do not agree with Mr. Lamacousa.
And at the end of the day, the Wisconsin Public Service Commission issued a permit that was requested based on your study.
Yes, it did.
All right. I had Harrison paper next, I guess we can skip that. That was UCLC. So let's go to John Slagle's presentation. And have you reviewed Slagle exhibits 3, 3A, and 5?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And do you agree with Mr. Slagle's opinions?
I don't agree with his opinions. He created an ISO model himself. He says he's a programmer, don't deny that in the least. He says it wasn't that hard. It is just some math, so someone who's inclined as such can do this. I have no problem with that. But he says that he took his model and predicted that the houses on Pleasant Ridge, as we did, and he said, well, I was within a dB, so we matched perfectly. Well, he then goes on to really split hairs about tenths and hundredths of a dB, so you can't be, well, I'm accurate to a dB, and then I'm going to go split hairs, so you can't do that. He also claimed that he predicted 39 dB at the Harkey residence over on Cal Ridge. My model predicted a 41, so I don't know. He said he used Google. We used very accurate GIS data. I don't know the reasons for the differences, but there are reasonably significant differences between the model that he came up with and the model that we came up with. And I would like to reiterate, we double-checked the results of our model against 2 other models. So we did a very professional level of quality assurance in that opinion.
Have you also examined what you refer to as his contour plots?
Yes, I have.
And your modeling is what's called point modeling, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We predicted individual points in space.
And which is more accurate, contour modeling or point modeling?
Well, point modeling is because a contour model is really predicted a bunch of points, but then you have to kind of draw the line in between, you have to interpolate. So for me, I prefer to rely on point models versus contours.
All right. Let's go to the Illinois noise standards. I have a series of collated exhibits. Let's start with Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 226. There's been a lot of discussion at this hearing about the specific levels at particular bands. Is this the regulation that establishes those levels both for daytime and nighttime?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And where do you measure to determine compliance with that regulation?
The point of reception, the point where you have to analyze to determine compliance is it says it right here, on any class A land. So it's, you want to analyze on the class A land.
The next exhibit is Pleasant Ridge 235, and this, I should say for the record, I'm sorry, 226 is 35 Illinois Administrative Code 901.102. Pleasant Ridge 235, you recognize this one?
Yes.
All right, and this is 35 Illinois Administrative Code 900.101, the definitions.
Correct.
And you'll see if you go to the third page, there's a definition for LBCS, the land-based classification standards, which designate land use functions by means of numeric codes.
Right.
And that's the LBCS, or those are the classes that are referred to in Exhibit 226.
Right.
The next exhibit is Pleasant Ridge 236, and that's, for the record, 35 Illinois Administrative Code 901.101, classification of land according to use. And is this regulation specifically the one that implements those land-based classification designations with respect to the specific noise levels in Exhibit 226?
Could you repeat that? What was that?
I ever could have, I won't.
The next exhibit is Pleasant Ridge 236, and that's for the record, 35 Illinois Administrative Code 901.101, classification of land according to use. And is this regulation specifically the one that implements those land-based classification designations with respect to the specific noise levels in Exhibit 226?
And the answer to that is yes.
And then finally, Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 225, 35 Illinois Administrative Code 901.Appendix B. What is that?
This is a listing of all these land use classification codes.
And based on these regulations that we've just gone through, Illinois, are the noise limits property line based or land use based?
Objection. It's not an attorney.
He doesn't have to be an attorney. He wants an acquisition who implements these regulations.
He's now giving a legal opinion.
You can answer this. I would like to, please.
I can. I mean, it's part of my job on every project that I work on.
All right, so we'll deny that.
So, yeah, it is up to an acquisition to determine where they're going to predict noise levels to determine compliance. In Illinois, you need to predict on the receiving property for the Class A land use.
Not at the property.
It's not at the property line, no, it's at the Class A land use.
And going back to Pleasant Ridge 225, the list of LBCS codes,
Yes.
what is the code for a single-family residence?
That's 1100 private household.
And are there any guidance documents from the land-based classification system regarding multiple uses of a parcel of property?
Yes. Again, it's my job to understand how these regulations are implemented, and one thing that I rely on is this LBCS, land-based classification system working paper. They get into how a single parcel of land can have multiple uses under the land-based classification code. So,
Sorry to interrupt you, but is that Pleasant Ridge 352 LBCS accessory uses?
if it's the same white paper, then
The white paper.
yes. So, and in fact, they specifically specifically get into farms and talking about how part of the land can be agricultural and part of the land can be a residence. It's clear that the application of this was such that you can have multiple uses on one piece of property.
And has the Illinois Pollution Control Board, whose regulations we're dealing with, itself provided any guidance on the issue of multiple uses and where you measure?
Yeah, and that would be Pleasant Ridge 228, which is the Knox Turris case. And they got into this very issue. You had,
Hang on 1 second, let me circulate this. Okay, Tom? All right, we're going to talk about Knox and Turris. Turris is T-U-R-I-S-S, Knox is K-N-O-S.
so this was a case where you had an industrial source, in this case.
Mr. Hankard, I don't mean to interrupt, but June, it's actually T-U-R-R-I-S, not one R.
Did I say the other one? I'm sorry.
Get an industrial source of noise, a coal mining operation, and a neighboring person complained about the noise, and measurements were made at the residence, and then they were made at a pond that was on the property. And the noise levels at the pond exceeded the limit, but the noise levels at the residence did not. And the crux of this ruling was that the pond is not a house and it's not Class A. So therefore, I said it exceeded the code, but it didn't. There is no code. It's unclassified. It doesn't have a limit. But at the residence, which is Class A and has a limit, the coal company met the limit. So that is really what this, and this just backs up what this white paper said, which is you have multiple uses on one property, and you have to deal with them as they are classified under the LPCA.
Mr. Chairman, I'm at a natural break. We're almost at 7:30. I don't know if you want to break now or have to keep going.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break? So we got 7:27. Try to get going again at 7:37.
But there's, of all this,
Glenn Schroff brought me these. And I left them in the car, and they're heavy. Cookies from my brother-in-law. Eat them.
afterwards out of your head.
I know. I don't blame you. I'm and if I am, I'm sure you are. I'll take some of these home to Edward later. Someone else's thing. Glenn did.
When you're cooking this audience, if you want like a cookie with another on the table from here, please help yourself. Thank you.
You better have one of these, it makes you feel better. She's the one running the work.
I'll take some passing around.
He's talked about everything else. There's like no shot. It's been a lot of time I've been running away. There's like no shot.
Isn't there a TV show that's taking that down?
Sometimes I wonder about myself too. No problem.
Oh, right, yes.
You're going to have to put the first one. You're not mine.
All right, we can go ahead and make sure that back to our All right, Mr. Blazer, when you're ready, you can go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hankard, have you looked at the specific modeling results for some of the folks that have actually testified in this proceeding?
Yes, I have.
Let's start with George Bush. What are the readings on that? Which receptor is it for?
Right, I dug into the Bush resonance, it's our receptor R582, and the predicted level there is 39.1 at the resonance. 41.0 at the house.
All right, let's, since the Ambrose letter is output in, we'll refer to the discussion of the Ambrose letter in Mr. Harkey's presentation. And you've reviewed the Ambrose letter, correct?
I have.
And what's your response to the Ambrose letter?
Steve came out and made all kinds of, I guess, I'll be specific.
Before you start, Mr. Hankard, are you aware that Mr. Harkey testified that Mr. Ambrose actually never visited the California Ridge Project?
I am aware of that, yes.
Then could you continue, please?
Well, one of Steve Ambrose's big points against my Calgary study is that we did long-term unattended monitoring, so we were not there at all times. And that's true. And he claims that the Illinois Pollution Control Board measurements are supposed to be made with an observer present. But, again, a wind turbine project, if you look at Cape Bridgewater, there's a quote in there that says the majority of the conclusions in this report were based on the results of unattended monitoring. It's just the nature of the beast. It's not practical for an acoustical consultant to remain on site for weeks and months at a time. And that said, we use the tools of our trade today to be there while not being there, if you will. For example, we record audio. So if we are reviewing the data and there's a certain hour that there's something that we want to know about, we can listen. We have frequency spectrum, so that's like a fingerprint. And it tells us, we can tell when it's traffic, and we can tell when it's wind, and we can tell when it's wind turbines. And then we also measured every 10 seconds. That was something that Paul Schomer was very specific about. So that you can see the time history. So when a car passes by, you can see it, and you can eliminate it from the data. So no, we were not there at all times. I was there every couple of weeks. But again, we have all these tools to enable us to do what the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations are asking us to do. And back to the fact that Paul Schomer was there, Steve, again, had a lot of criticisms of my report, and I think his concluding remarks was it shouldn't be used as a basis for anything. This report was done with Paul Schomer, who is the chairman of the Standards Committee of the Acoustical Society of America. I mean, if there's anybody that knows how to do something per standard, it's the guy that has written many of the standards that my industry relies on. Steve states that, quote, measurements were not made during mandatory operational curtailment or harvest months. We were painfully clear about this in the report. There was, the project was under curtailment, but it was for mitigating for bass, and the way they do that is the turbines don't operate in light wind, so instead of cutting in when the wind gets to 3.5 meters per second, they let the wind get a little stronger. So none of the curtailment had anything to do with the full operation of the plant, which is what we were concerned with. So that's just a red herring. Steve, he's just trying to confuse matters on that.
Objection as to what Mr. Ambrose may or may not be doing. That's inappropriate testimony.
We'll allow that objection, so we can strike that from the record. Any reference to what you feel Mr. Ambrose is doing to the report.
Fair enough. Steve also criticized us for not making measurements during harvest months. First of all, well, maybe he didn't say we didn't do the measurements, so we didn't utilize the measurements. And it's true, in October, out there, you have distant farming equipment that's making the same type of sound in terms of frequency as the turbines, and it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to separate the two. And it wasn't like we packed up and went home and said, we can't separate the two. No, we kept measuring. Again, we measured in August, September, didn't get enough data, measured in October, we had trouble with the harvesting. So we kept going until we got enough data to make a scientific judgment, and that's what we did. Steve says, ineffective interpretation of audio recordings. First of all, we have very high quality equipment. These audio recordings are better quality than CD, and the playback systems that we use are very sophisticated. And I think what he's referring to is in there. I had, in full disclosure, I had noted that there was 1 hour that we couldn't couldn't tell what was going on. And I put that note in the report, to be honest, that there was this 1 hour where we couldn't tell what was going on. And so Steve jumps on that and says that we did ineffective interpretation of audio recordings. That's just not at all the truth. Steve says, and I quote, highly subjective methodology was used to select noise level measurements for analysis. Highly subjective? No, not at all. It was the standard tools of the acoustics trade. If you see a car pass by in the time signature, that's not a wind turbine, don't analyze that. That is not subjective. With the harvest, it was a frequency issue. We could tell there were these little spikes in the frequency plot when a combine or a grain dryer was operating. That's not subjective. We know that that's what it is, and that's why we didn't use that data. Steve says, quote, 4 months of noise level data had to be reduced to tables and charts with poor audio quality data. Again, yes, tables and charts is what engineers produce. So yes, we produce tables and charts just like Hankard produced hundreds. You have to reduce the data. That's our job. And again, poor audio quality data. I don't know why he makes a statement like that when we list the exact equipment we use, and it's extremely high quality. So Steve gets into making statements about how he says you produce less electric power and noise at full RPM. And he was criticizing us for not publishing the fact that the turbines were at full power. Instead, we chose to publish the fact that they were spinning as fast as they could. But as the turbine engineers will tell you, the two are inextricably related. The faster they spin, the more power they produce. And the turbines at Cattle Ridge were operating at full capacity when we did this study for the data that we reported. There was no cheating. I don't know if that's being insinuated, but the turbines at Cattle Ridge were operating at full power when we did that study. That's all I have to say about what Ambrose said about our calendars. I just let me summarize by saying that I stand very much behind what we did at Calridge, and everything that Steve said in rebuttal of my work, I don't think has any basis whatsoever.
And one final subject, I hope we did this right on the break, is the minor presentation of what we think is left of it in this record. And for the record, Mr. Chairman, what we've done is he has the minor presentation up there. He's circled certain pages that he's prepared to respond to. We compared them to the list that you handed me, so I think we're going to cover the ones that are that he's prepared to address. So you may proceed, Mr. Mayor.
All right, well, with regard to the minor presentation, so right now I'm on page 11. And he says that the applicant did not provide 1,000 Hertz band, narrow band, 1,000 Hertz, 1 dB narrow band noise contours. No, we didn't. We're not required to. And again, I don't believe that contours are as accurate as what we did. He says here that there's no room for error. And he goes into on other pages, let's see here. For example, page 25 is titled, Why the Lack of Safety Margins? I hope I have explained to you, but let me reiterate that we do have a safety margin. We know that we compared our levels to what we did at Cal Ridge, and we expect to be a solid 2 dB under the limits. So to say that we have no safety margin is not at all true. We absolutely have a safety margin. To say nothing of the very conservative nature in which we went about our predictions, which I have gone over in my presentation. this presentation brought up was the LNTE blades, and he makes the claim that they are not tested, I believe. And that's just not true. General Electric, the manufacturer of this equipment, is required to test this equipment per this IEC 61400 standard, just like they do every other wind turbine, just like every other manufacturer does to all their equipment. So these LNTE turbines have been tested, and the data that we use in our model is from those tests, and it was done per this international standard. So I'm not sure why they say that the LNTE blades have not been tested. He also, in the presentation, of course, gets into the issue of property line compliance, and that we're supposed to measure the property line, and for all the reasons that I spoke about that previously, that's not my opinion at all. I believe those are the only points I have.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this point, do you have any questions of Mr. Hankard? DBA, do we have any questions? John, do you have any questions?
I got one question.
All right.
You talked about people with the Ambrose thing.
Just push.
You talked about making the Ambrose.
Yes.
And he asked about in the fall of the year you didn't take them. So what's the difference if they're running in the fall? I mean, you make them the sound, what? They just say you have to have a windmill noise and that. I mean, they're going to live with this other sound plus the windmills. So why can't they make it that?
So when we go out to measure wind turbines or any other source for that matter, and put a microphone out in the environment, that's picking up the sound from everything: traffic, trains, windmills, wind turbines, harvesting equipment, everything. So then, but the regulation says that the wind turbine noise shall not exceed X. So we have to separate those two.
Okay, so that's all what regulation says is the wind turbine.
Yes, it's the source in question, which is in this case the wind turbine. So it's the separation of the data that in October we could not properly separate the two because harvest equipment and wind turbines actually produce noise in the same frequency range. So Steve was criticizing that aspect of it.
So if a person lives next to a busy road and they get so much noise year round or whatever, the fact that the windmill comes in and makes that noise that much louder, nobody cares.
I don't know that nobody cares, but the IBC, the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulation is for the source in question.
Yeah, so I mean, if the person's living there and they have something making a certain amount of noise that keeps them right below that threshold, and you bring something else in and pushes it above it, nobody cares. Because you got to filter the two out as long as one's, you're not combining them together.
Well, if you can't separate the two, then that's what you do. And again, you're looking at the level of the turbine-only aspect of your data.
But still, if you combine two of them together, they could have knocked more than that. But they're telling you you don't have to worry about it. Each one stands on its own. But if you combine the two and it goes over, nobody cares.
Well, in fact, the regulation actually says that you have to separate the two. It lays out procedures for doing just this very sort of thing. It envisioned that you're going to have to separate out sources that you aren't concerned yourself with the sources you are concerned yourself with.
Okay, but then, so you're sorting them out, and they both add up to regular threshold. Yours does and Joe Lowe's does, but the person living there has to live combined, which could be more than that, right?
Yes. I mean, in fact, when cars go by on the road, they're the level can go up to 70, and the cars are, in the end, far louder on a per instance basis.
Okay.
DBA, do you have any other questions? All right.
Mr. Hankard, can you go to Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 226, please? It's 901.12, sound emitted Class A land.
Yeah, 226?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have.
Well, in both A and B, I noted the last, I guess, 2 lines of the, 2.5 lines of the sections, that when measured at any point within such receiving Class A land, provided, however, no measurement of sound pressure levels shall be made less than 25 feet from such property line noise source. So my concern is, I understand that a parcel could have multiple uses. I read this to say that that measurement cannot be taken closer than 25 feet to the property line or parcel line. So you're not going to be at the outer edge of the property. But where does it say that this has to be at the foundation of the residence? If we're talking about Class A land, and I have been trying to read through your white paper to find that, and I'm not to the point where I read it yet. Can you point me?
Right, well, the white paper is not specific to Illinois pollution control regulations, so you may not find that in there. And then on the 25 feet, it says that you're not supposed to, you don't want to measure less than 25 feet from the source, not from the property line, from the property line source. And what that is that if you have let's say you have a farmer and he wants to plow it up to his property line, if you didn't have that 25-foot allowance in there, then someone could say, hey, you're over the limit. They're required to step back 25 feet. So that's a really kind of different issue.
This says, though, within such receiving Class A land.
Right, and again, that gets back to the fact that the barn is not a Class A land, the driveway is not a Class A land.
Okay, so how do we determine where 25 feet from Class A to Class B land when you have a property that's a multiple use, that has multiple uses?
Well,
That's what I'm trying to figure out by all the documentation that you all provided, and I'm not finding because I'm struggling with the fact that you measure the sound at the foundation of the home.
Versus
Versus how far out from the foundation of the home do you go? If you're not going to the property line of the property, then what kind of
Well, yeah, I just keep coming back to the fact that the land use classification code that defines Class A land in this case is a household. To me, that's the house. And so that's where
what do we do with the pieces in between the house and the barn and the pond and the X and the Y and Z?
those are not classified. They're
They're
unclassified.
unclassified. So I can be sitting on my patio or off the edge of my patio, and that is unclassified. So the measurement, because the wind turbine on that side of my house, and the measurement is higher than 41 dB, it does not matter. There's no buffer.
Well, let me help you understand the order of magnitude here. If you were to go from the center of a house and go up, let's say 50 feet in any direction, which would encompass any standard house and patio and what have you, at most on this project, the noise level will increase by 0.3 decibels. But oftentimes it's you've got turbines in different directions, so if you move closer to one, you move further away from the other. So in reality, it's going to be about maybe a 10 or 2 decibel change.
I'm just looking at your list when we have residents that we're at 41.0. So if there's no buffer, which
Well, again,
it's pointing to something and telling me there's nothing that has to be at the foundation of the home, and the statute I'm reading doesn't lead me to think that. And if it's in this case, I haven't got through the whole entire case yet either.
well, first, again, back to what you said, we do have that buffer. We do have a 2 decibel buffer, so to say that we don't have any is not completely true. And all I can say is I keep going back to house.
Buffer, 2 decibel buffer from what?
From the fact that when we compare what we got on California Ridge, the model was showing 2 decibels high. So the 41 on our model, I expect to be 39 in reality.
Have you measured Have you gotten actual readings at any other land facility than Calvert?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
And how did your actuals compare to your predictions?
We don't often predict it back to the model because in those cases, our job is to prove compliance or lack of regulation.
See where I'm going with this? I'm trying to figure out, is this model of our predictions going to meet what our ordinance says? So
There are a number of pieces of literature out there, including that Kaliski-Duncan paper that I mentioned before, that consistently show that if you use the ISO model the way we have it, with zero ground, you will not exceed the level that you expect. That is what the science is showing. It's what it's showing me on my projects, and it's what it's showing other researchers.
okay, that's it for me.
All right. I guess just back to this. I'm still not clear with regard to your question. Explain to me what you feel that last two lines means.
The 25 feet?
In its entirety. Break that down for me
To start beginning with except as provided.
Yeah, towards the end of it. We can go through the whole thing if that would be better.
All right, so no person shall cause the emission of sound, so the turbines cause emissions of sound, that when it propagates off of the property on which the turbines are located and impinges upon a Class A land, that it shall not exceed the limits when measured at any point within such Class A land, provided no measurement of sound shall be made less than 25 feet from the property source. So you never want to assess anything that within 25 feet of the turbine. So to me, that last part is moot in this matter.
Okay, I have another question on that then. Are you saying that the receiving Class A land is the property with the turbine?
I'm sorry, again?
What are you saying that Class A, receiving Class A land is?
Again, the receiving Class A land is the household.
And you're saying that the last part after the commas is that no measurement of sound shall be made less than 25 feet from such property line noise source, being the turbine.
Correct.
How do you measure an impact on Class A receiving land? And then you're going back to that no measurement of sound. It's saying that you're measuring a Class A receiving land, and then you're going backwards to say it has to be within a certain distance of the emitting source?
No, I mean, please don't be confused by this 25 feet thing. That grows out of the fact that when we go out onto a project, they're asking you never to get as close as 25 feet to the source, and we're not on this project, so it's really not relevant.
So why would you, okay, you can't probably answer that. Okay.
All right. So I'm trying to envision all this in my mind. So let's say we have a turbine in the middle of a farm field. Okay. Very common. And there's a road. It's a service road that goes to it. What's the road classification?
I'd have to look through the codes, but I don't believe the road is classified. That would be my guess, but that's subject to check.
Okay. So would that be inclusive of that? Would you consider the road to be part of the parcel that's associated with the noise source?
So turbine is on agricultural land, and you're saying, what is it? Yeah, I mean, that road is part of that property, but neither of them are classified.
Okay, and this says 25 feet from the property line of the noise source.
But again, it's saying that no measurement shall be made essentially closer than 25 feet. That's
Mr. Chairman, if I may, you misread that this time. It doesn't say from the property line of the noise source. You stuck a note in there. It says from such property line noise source.
and from the source.
I don't understand how property line ends up in a noise source. Consider a noise source or a property line. We need to clarify how this works. Because as far as I'm concerned, the noise source has a property line. And it might be at the end of the lane if it's the closest point from that turbine to the next receptor. We need to determine how we're analyzing this. And I feel I don't know. You haven't sold me on your idea yet, either. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think that the terminology of property line noise was clearly confusing. It was not perhaps the best choice of words. But in my opinion, it means the source is you're on a piece of property, and once it goes off of your property, now you have to determine its impact again based on the use of the land that it's hit. The noise on your property is your business.
So why did they enter the property line into that discussion?
I was not, part of the discussions on the terminology when this was developed, so I don't know what they.
But would you agree that a noise source is different than the property line associated with the noise source?
Yes, but that doesn't, when they say a property line noise source, they're still just talking about a noise source.
Does that help you any? I'm still really, interestingly, as you handed this out, the both of us highlighted the same part. So we're really trying to get a better understanding of this. I'll tell you what, we'll move on to some other questions. Maybe more will come out, we'll talk about it a little bit more. Units of local government.
If I may?
Yeah.
There is a definition here of property line noise source in the definitions in Pleasant Ridge 235. So it is any equipment or facility or combination thereof which operates with any land, within any land, used as specified by the code. Such equipment or facility may be capable of emitting sound beyond the property line on which it's operated. And I think that is their notion. Again, their terminology may not be great, but it's a source, it's a piece of equipment. It's nothing more, nothing less. And when it operates, it's sound. Once it leaves the property on which it's located, then it becomes a concern. It's not a concern on your property. You don't get annoyed by the noise that you make. That's not the issue. The issue is how does it affect neighboring land uses? And there are specific noise codes in this country that do indeed talk about property lines as the place where you have to determine the impact. This is not one of them.
All right. School boards, local governments, any questions from them? Mr. Lucas.
Let's start with the 25 foot. That's not where I was going to start, but let's start there anyway. The 25 foot in essence is a buffer if the noise source is exactly at the property line, correct? You have to go back 25 feet before you can start measuring. Is that the point?
That's correct.
Okay, so that implies to me that if the noise emission is not at the property line, you could be measuring directly at the property line, correct? Or within that 25 feet, correct?
If it would, yes, you could measure that, sure.
And there would be nothing wrong with that.
Well, yeah, you're free to measure anywhere you want, but if it's not Class A land, then there's no limit to associate that measurement with.
Understood. But we'll get into what Class A land is, because there's a bunch of case law in there, and we'll talk about those. But let's start back. You've said you've read some of the cases the Illinois Pollution Control Board has come up with, correct? You read Knox, probably read other ones over the years, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You're also familiar, I assume, with the regulations that the Illinois Pollution Control Board has passed over the last 30, 40 years regarding these particular sections?
Could you be more specific?
Well, I would, but that's just a general question right now. I mean, you've read the regulations they've passed over the years, correct? They've passed regulations to discuss these particular sections, correct?
Again, if you could be more specific, I really...
Okay, well, you know what, Tom, I apologize. Could you give one of those, Mr. Park? Mr. Hankard, I'm sorry, I forgot to keep it. Showing you what has been marked as UCLC Exhibit 154. You ever seen this?
No.
So you've never seen this regulation?
No, sir.
So as a professional acoustician, you've never actually looked at the in the matter of noise pollution control regulations passed by the board in 1973 that specifically give notes.
Objection.
Well, I'm
The
asking.
witness has already said he's never seen this.
Well,
Now he's repeating it, trying to read it to the record something that the witness has
Well,
already
I'll just ask that.
Excuse me, I wasn't finished.
I'm just gonna.
I wasn't finished.
I'm not asking the question anymore. I would ask that UCLC Exhibit 154 be admitted into evidence as a regulation of the Illinois Pollution Control Board.
First of all, it's not a regulation, it's an opinion. It hasn't been authenticated by anyone. This witness has already said he's never seen it before, so there's no basis for putting it into the record.
Let's wait a second. This is an opinion that's a published opinion of the Illinois Pollution Control Board. To say somehow that I need someone to authenticate it, it's like authenticating a case.
Except that in this case, he did authenticate the case. He's already testified that he's never seen this before.
I don't need to authenticate cases. That's very clear.
All right. We're going to admit this, and we're going to take notes.
Okay. Now that UCLC Exhibit 154 is in evidence, we'll strike that. Administrative Code 901.102, which I think, and I apologize because I have different exhibits because I had all these ready, but I think it's Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 226, correct?
Correct. 901.102 is Exhibit 226.
Okay, and that's at least part of the noise emission standards that we've been discussing.
Yes.
Correct? And in fact, 35 this Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 226 is where we find the nighttime limits for sound emitted to Class A land, correct?
No, these are the daytime limits, I believe.
Well, A is the daytime and B is the nighttime, correct?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see the back, yes.
Same section. You've already been talking about it for a while. And those limits, again, that are for Class A land are 41 decibels at night at 1,000 hertz and 47 decibels at 500 hertz, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the classification as land of land is based on the use, not the zone?
Yes, I do agree with that.
You would agree with that?
That it's based on the use, not the zone. Correct.
So if property in unincorporated Livingston County, which may be zoned agricultural, as I think all of the property is in unincorporated Livingston County, is used as strictly a residence, it's Class A land, correct?
Class A land is a household, yes.
Only the household in your mind, nothing else.
That's what the regulation says, yes.
Well, you'd show me in here where it says only the household. And maybe we can shorten all this because I'll be shocked as hell.
Because if you look at,
Mr. Chairman, I think that's completely inappropriate. And I ask that you instruct counsel to refrain from comments like this.
Mr. Ruby, as
let me rephrase the question. I apologize. I'll withdraw it. But can you show me anywhere in these regulations where it talks about the household rather than the word land? Anywhere in here?
the limits that we are discussing, the 41 and 47 here, those pertain to only Class A land.
Agreed.
If you look at the list of Class A lands, you have a household, and then you have a number of other things like maybe a clinic or a hospital, but there's nothing else that speaks of anything other than, with regard to residential land use, there's nothing else that speaks to anything other than household.
Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 225 is Exhibit B to these standards, correct?
225 you're referring to? I have 225, yes.
And that's Exhibit B to the standards?
Appendix B?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and it says land-based classification standards, correct?
Yes.
Does it say building-based classification standards?
That says land-based classification.
Thank you. And in fact, let's go to I apologize for the delay. I was trying to get the page numbers right, or the exhibit numbers right, with the change. Okay, let's go to UCLC Exhibit 154 again.
Okay.
Okay, and Rule 201, which can be found on page 19 of the exhibit.
Okay.
Starts off, classification of land according to use. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does it say classification of structure according to use?
No, we just agreed it said classification of land.
Okay. And then if I keep going on, the second paragraph, it says, at the beginning, the classification of land is dependent on the actual use being made of the land rather than on anticipated or planned use such as could occur if the classifications were based on zoning, correct?
Right.
Okay, so again, we're talking about the actual use being made of the land, correct?
Yes.
Okay? And then it goes on to the next paragraph. Actual land use is an appropriate basis in that regulation, in that the regulation is designed to protect people where they actually live and work, rather than protecting vacant property in anticipation of people living and working there. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to I would ask that UCLC Exhibit 153 be admitted into evidence. That is the decision of the Illinois Pollution Control Board, Hoffman versus City of Columbia. And in a second, I can read the site to the record. And that is at 1996 Westlaw 633343, again, an Illinois Pollution Control Board case. I would ask that be admitted into evidence.
Based on what foundation, Mr. Chairman?
Again, it's a case.
I would point out, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Lucahan's objected to our effort to put in the Knox case.
And I was overruled. Just to make the record clear.
You certainly were. But again, Mr. Hankard testified that he was familiar with the Knox case. We still don't have any indication that he knows anything about this particular case.
It's a case.
It sure is.
We've let in a regulation that he never knew of. We sure as heck can let in a case and ask him if he's ever read it, or seen it and quote from it.
I don't know what regulation you're talking about, because what it before is an opinion, not a regulation.
Okay, we let in an opinion.
All right, I'm gonna just simply ask this. This is the rebuttal portion with questions that follow the rebuttal, not your opportunity for sure rebuttal. Do you have a question of something that is rebutted that this particular case would require the question to be?
Yes.
Would require the information.
And we'll get to it. Yeah, in regards to his opinion on land use, that it's not land use, that it's not the property line, but the building. This goes to that issue. All these cases go to exactly something he's been talking about for the past hour and 15 minutes.
All right, I'm going to take this under advisement as far as allowing this or not. I'll let you go a little bit here and see if we can get there.
Okay. Showing you what is marked as UCLC Exhibit 153, going to page 10 of that decision. If you would, please.
Yes.
It states at the beginning of paragraph, the fourth paragraph on there, we find that the actual use of the property dictates the classification rather than the zoning, who or what entity is conducting the activity, correct?
Yes.
Okay, going back to UCLC Exhibit 154. Again, still in Rule 201 on page 19. It says at the beginning, it is important to recognize that the land use is not necessarily coextensive with land ownership. A good example of this is a farmer's piece of property. The portion of land used as farmland would be classified as C use. We'd all agree with that, correct?
Yes. Well, no, farmland, I believe, is on.
Farmland's a C, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And while the farmstead itself would be classified as an A use. Did I read that correctly?
It does say that.
And it's the farmstead, correct?
Yes, it says that.
It doesn't say the farmhouse, it says the farmstead, correct?
It does say that, yes.
Okay. Let's go back to Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 226, which I think was entered 2 months ago. Or was entered, I don't know when, it was already entered. In fact, it says, does it not, in subsection B, dealing with nighttime noise emissions, that quote.
If you could hang on just a sec.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 226.
Yeah, 901.102.
Yes.
Okay, that's the PCB, Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations, correct?
Yes.
The one we've been talking about. And it says, quote, no person shall cause or allow the emission of sound during daytime levels from any property line noise source located on any Class A, B, or C land to any receiving Class A land which exceeds any allowable octave band sound pressure level specified in the following table when measured at any point within such receiving Class A land, correct?
Correct.
At any point within the land, correct?
Yes, that's what it says.
Okay. And your models, as we decided, are not based on the land, they're based on the middle of the house, or where are they? I never quite understood it.
Yeah, the center of the house.
Okay. So at the center of the house, we move 50 feet out, we could have 0.3 decibel change, correct, you say?
At most, yes.
Okay. How about 500 feet out?
Going to depend on the distance to the nearest turbine, distance to other turbines.
Okay, but we could have more than 0.3 there, correct?
Yes.
And at 200 feet, we could have more than 0.3 as well, correct?
Yes.
And your models are based on a residence location, even if the entire property is used for residential purposes, correct?
What do you mean by used for residential purposes?
Well, you talked about you reviewed Mr. Kaiser's testimony for it, right?
We looked at his property.
Okay, and his property was at 41.0, correct? Or his residence was at 41.0.
I think that was Kaiser, but that was a different one.
That was the Kaiser.
If it was.
I'm sorry, correct. It was the Don Slater one.
Correct.
Okay, Kaiser was at 40.6, I apologize.
Okay.
And the evidence is that the Kaisners only use their land for residence. They don't farm it. correct? You remember that, or did you see that?
I was not here on that evening.
Okay, Mr. Blazer didn't bother to show you that one, correct?
Objection.
Withdrawn. In fact, your models are not based on the actual areas of mixed-use lands, such as that portion of the land used for things other than farmland, correct? It's just based on where the residence is.
We predicted that the center of each residence is.
Okay, in fact, you treated all of these types of properties the same, whether entirely residential use or a mixed use, by modeling up to the actual residence itself, correct?
I guess I don't know how many different ways to say it. All we did was predict at the house.
Okay. I think during cross-examination by Mr. Slagle, and I know today, you talked about the Knox case, right?
Yes.
And I think you said, quote, so the Class A land, a residential property, would be around the area around a house, not the entire extent of the platted land. You recall that?
I don't recall that. That was during my testimony.
Yes. You don't recall that?
No.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, let's go, let's ask if you recall this question being asked this question and giving this answer. Council, it's January 21st, 2015. Starting at page 1324, line 21. Might tell me when you're there, I'm not trying to rush you.
1 second.
Take your time. Yes, sir. When it starts, okay?
Yep.
Okay. Question is, okay, and more so, we can actually read the 901.102B, which says, quote, when measured at any point within such receiving class land, comma, provided, comma, however, comma. I'm sorry, Jim, I apologize. I'll start off. Where'd you get to?
901.102, which says, quote, when measured
at any point within such receiving Class A land, provided, however, that no measurement of sound pressure levels should be made less than 25 feet from such property line noise source. So talking again about the grass versus patio, it seems to me that Class A land is the entire Class A property that your house is on. So I'd like to hear more about what you're saying in the case study in Illinois. That answer, right, that the Pollution Control Board is taking up this very issue in the past, and they've determined that it is that the use of the land is not the property line per se. So the Class A land, a residential property, would be the area around the house, not the entire extent of the platted land. You remember being asked that question and giving that answer?
If you just read, I do not recall it specifically, but if you just read it from the transcript, I'm not going to deny what was said.
Okay, and the case you were talking about was the Knox versus Turris case, the Turris Coal Company case, correct?
I believe that's what I was referring to.
Okay. Do you have that? I think it was, I don't remember. It's Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 228.
Which is what now?
You see it, which is the Knox versus Turris Coal Company case?
Oh, okay.
It's,
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I have it here.
okay. Is it your opinion that if noise emissions do not exceed the limits in section 901.102 that they cannot still violate the Illinois Pollution Control Board standards?
I guess that seems like a circular reference. I mean, these are the standards. So if we don't exceed the standards, then we don't exceed the standards.
So in your mind, these are the only standards that you have to meet?
These are the only numerical standards.
Okay, but they're not the only standards, correct?
There is other language, I think.
In fact, there's case law, or Illinois Pollution Control Board opinions that have found that where someone is below the standards, or someone has proven that they're above the property is above the standards, that they've still found a violation of the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations, correct?
I'm not aware of any other specific.
Okay. Well, let's go with this. Go back to the Knox case. Sorry, I keep wanting to say Knox County. Page 12 of that decision. I guess it's the third full court paragraph. It says, does it not, that the board has previously found that the compliance with the numerical noise standards does not present an absolute bar to finding a violation of the general nuisance noise prohibitions. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And the next paragraph goes on to state that the board has determined that noise interfering with sleep and use of yard, and then they cite the Hoffman decision, and trucking operation noise impacting sleep, watching television, and conversing, they cite Thomas versus Carey Companies of Illinois, does constitute an interference. Here the noise impacts the sleep of the complainants. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, so the PCB in essence stated that it's still possible that even if you do not meet the standards or the noise does not rise to the level of 41, let's say at nighttime, that it still can interfere with the enjoyment of life, correct?
Well, I mean, in this specific one, we're talking about interference with sleep.
Okay, well, let's go down to the two paragraphs, the next paragraph.
What page are we on?
Page 12, at least the one I have.
The one you have?
Well, I'm hoping it's the same one, but can you find what I'm talking about? You know what
Yeah, 112.
Yeah. I just printed off Westlaw. The board finds that the noise emissions from the school do interfere with the complainant's enjoyment of life. Do you see that?
And I just, if I may interrupt, I'm sorry, Phil, but this isn't, exhibit 228, I think it may have different page numbers than the one we're reading from.
Well, he's got the right page, so he knows where I'm at.
Yes, page 12 of 228.
It's right above unreasonable interference. The heading unreasonable interference. Okay, you saw that? I read that correctly from that decision?
Yes.
And that's the decision you were relying on earlier?
The Knox.
Okay.
Yes.
This may be duplicative, and I apologize, but I don't really, I'm not sure the standards are set up the same way, but I think you're going to see them, so I don't think it's going to matter for you. Handing you, Mr. Martins, you see also section 156. And I think you handed out parts of part 900 of the Illinois Pollution Control Board laws, but this is all of 900.
Okay.
Okay, have you seen that before, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Section 900.102 states, are you there for me?
I'm not at 102 yet, no.
Okay. Take your time, let me know when you're there. I think it's about the 8th page in or something like that. I may be off a page or two. But
102, I have it here.
okay. Section 901.102 states, quote, no person shall cause or allow the emission of sound beyond the boundaries of his property, as property is defined in section 25 of the Act, so as to cause noise pollution in Illinois. Is that correct statement?
Yes.
Okay, again, I'm talking about property, not structures, correct?
Well, they're saying beyond the property on which the source was located.
Okay, but they're talking about the property line.
Yeah, beyond the boundary of the property on which the source is located.
Okay, section 900.101 actually defines noise pollution, correct? It's about the 5th page.
Yes.
Okay. And it's defined noise pollution as, quote, the emission of sound that unreasonably interferes with the enjoyment of life or with any lawful business or activity, end quote, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, this is UCLC Exhibit 159 that I handed you. I assume you recognize this.
Yes.
This is again 35 Illinois Administration Code 910.104. You see that?
I do.
And you recognize this document as part of the Illinois Pollution Control Board regs, correct?
Yes.
And again, it specifically says, does it not, that, quote, sound pressure level measurements are not required to establish a violation of 35 Illinois Administration Code 900.102, correct?
It does say that.
Okay, and that's the interference with enjoyment of life, correct?
Unreasonably interferes with the enjoyment of life or with any lawful business or activity.
Okay. You said a few minutes ago, you're a member of the Acoustical Society of America, correct?
Yes.
And that's, we all agree, is one of the most respected acoustic organizations in the country.
It is.
And you've talked a lot today about the Cow Ridge project and the tests you performed out there, correct?
Yes.
And you used Paul Schomer to assist you on this project, correct?
Yeah, more of a collaboration. Sure.
Okay. And I think you said on November 18th, because he's a 40-year veteran in the field and very respected, and I think you kind of implied that again tonight, correct?
Yes.
He is also, as you said, the standards director at the Acoustical Society of America, correct?
I believe he is presently that. Yes.
And that's a pretty big job.
Yeah.
And who hired him to work on Cow Ridge? Who made the decision to bring him on board, I guess is the better statement.
I don't know who made that decision. We were both working for Jeep and Blazer.
So Jeep and Blazer hired him.
Yes, Jeep and Blazer hired Mr. Schomer.
And they hired you?
Yes.
Okay, did you recommend that Jeep and Blazer bring Mr. Schomer onto that project?
I don't think I recommended it.
You didn't have a problem?
Absolutely not.
And he was also hired, to your knowledge, he was also hired here in Livingston County to work for the applicant, correct?
On this project,
Yeah.
I think he was retained for his assistance, yes.
Okay. We have not heard him to come and testify.
No.
Okay. You have in front of you Hayes Exhibit number 2, correct?
Is that Exhibit 130?
No, it's Hayes Exhibit number 2. It's the, you actually referred to it, you quoted from it. It's the stuff on the Cape Bridgewater study. It's the opinions of Ambrose and Schomer and Rand and Hessler.
Okay, I know what you're referring to.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me.
Well, take the time, get it. You still have it, correct? Or did Mr. Blazer take
I don't
it?
have a copy of it with me.
You know what? I think I have an extra copy here. I apologize. Okay. Showing you what was previously marked as Hayes Exhibit 2, the last page. First full paragraph. Schomer states about the Cape Bridgewater study, does it not? That, quote, this study finds that these 6 people sense the operation of the turbines via other pathways than hearing or seeing, and that the adverse reactions to the operations of the wind turbines correlates directly with the power output of the wind turbines and fairly large changes in power output. Did I quote that correctly?
You quoted it correctly, yes.
Okay, the next paragraph goes on to state, does it not, that, quote, attempts may be made to obfuscate these simple points with such arguments as it cannot be proved that infrasound is the cause of discomfort. But that, again, is a specious argument. The important point here is that something coming from the wind turbines to affect these people, and that something increases or decreases as the power output of the turbine increases or decreases. Denying infrasound is the agent that accomplishes nothing. It really does not matter what the pathway is, whether it's infrasound or some new forms of rays or electromagnetic field coming off the turbine blades. Schomer, your well-respected acoustician, said this as well, correct?
He made these statements, yes.
Okay, and then he again goes on to state in the next paragraph, quote, some may ask, this is only 6 people, I'm sorry. Type it, can't read my own type. I can't type, actually. Why is it so important? The answer is that up until now, wind farm operators have said there are no known cause and effect relations between wind farm emissions, doesn't say noise, and the response of people living in the vicinity of the wind farm, other than those related to visual and or audible stimuli. And these lead to some flicker which is treated, and some annoyance with noise. This study proves that there are other pathways that affect some people, at least 6, end quote. Again, your well-respected colleague said this as well, didn't he?
Yes.
You know, and you've talked about Hartke tonight, and you said, and you know he's complaining that the California Ridge wind turbines affect the city, correct? That's his complaint.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'm sorry, I was a little clear. Not very clear. You know that one of Mr. Hartke's complaints of the California Ridge wind turbines is that they affect his sleep, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, were you done with your question?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll object. Mr. Hankard did say anything, Mr. Hankard. It's beyond the scope of the
He talks significantly about the Cal Ridge study, which was done primarily at the Hartke property line.
He didn't say a word about Mr. Hartke.
But he said a lot about Cal Ridge. In fact, I think he did say Hartke. Let me find my notes.
I said Hartke when I introduced the Ambrose letter that I asked him to respond. Because it's in the Hartke presentation. He was exclusively discussing the Ambrose letter.
All right. We don't recall Mr. Hankard's direct reference to Hartke.
Okay. You performed noise emissions in your Cal Ridge study near Ted Hartke's home, correct?
We measured the noise emissions, yes.
Correct. And that measurement was done at the property line, correct?
It was not done explicitly at the property line. It was done at a piece of available land that kind of replicated the same distances between our measurement location and the turbines versus Mr. Hartke's house on the turbines.
Oh, so you replicated the distance. You didn't come up to the edge of somebody else's property and measure there. You just replicated the distance from there, correct?
Well, we weren't allowed to go on the Hartke property, so then the challenge became, where can we measure that we have the land available to us, where the measurement will be indicative of what will happen in the Hartke residence. And in fact, the 2 locations that we chose were slightly closer to the turbines than the Hartke residence itself.
But you made a judgment as to which property that would be because you couldn't get to, because you weren't at the property line.
Yes, we made a judgment in the field, absolutely.
And for how long did you measure at those locations?
Started in August, finished on November 20th, I believe it was about 4.5 months.
And I think you testified that you measured for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Right?
Yes.
And you had the monitors you set up about every 2-3 weeks.
More like every 2 weeks, yes.
Okay, and how many noise emissions monitors did you set up in Cal-Ridge at this time?
We set up 2 that were representative of the Harkey residents and the Miles residents. We set up 1 closer to a turbine, and then we actually set up 2 others that had some more distant turbines.
So how many times? 5. I apologize, I was reading that concept. So in essence, you didn't visually watch because it was impossible.
Yeah, you can't visually watch it at night, obviously.
Did you, the statement came up about the IPCB regulations and Mr. Ambrose's statement that you did not measure in compliance with the IPCB regulations because you weren't there the entire time visually. Remember that, right?
Yes.
Did you measure in strict compliance with the IPCB regulations? That's my question.
Yes.
Showing you what has been marked as UCLC Exhibit 150. This is the Charter Hall Homeowners Association versus Overland Transportation System case. Or decision by the Illinois Pollution Control Board, 1998, Westlaw 714214. You ever seen this case?
No, I don't believe I have.
I keep finding cases you haven't seen. I apologize. However, I would ask that this be entered into evidence as a case of the Illinois Pollution Control Board.
Again, Mr. Chairman, beyond the scope of rebuttal, and this person that just testified that you were with.
Well, it's not beyond the scope of rebuttal. Let's get that straight, because I haven't asked the question other than when he's seen it, and the next question will clearly not be beyond the scope of rebuttal. And second, as we said, it's a case from the Pollution Control Board that he's supposed to be an expert on.
All right, we're going to go with allow UCLC Exhibit 150.
Okay. Let's bring your attention to page 13 of the decision, if you would. First full paragraph. And we're going to talk about the last 3 sentences. The sentence that starts Part 951.
Okay.
It says, Part 951 requires, among other things, that the person taking sound measurements be present while measurements are being taken, to look and listen for extraneous sound sources and varying wind conditions that may affect the data. See 35 Illinois Admin Code 951.105, parentheses 7. It goes on to say, Mr. Harmon left the site while the measurements were being taken. Accordingly, he did not comply with this provision of Part 951. Did I quote that correctly?
Yes.
So like Mr. Harmon, you weren't there when the measurements were being taken, correct?
No, well, all of the measurements were being taken, but there were times when we were there.
Okay, and there were times that Mr. Hartman was at these locations too. But what were the decibel nighttime levels that you measured outside of Hartman's house? Or out at your location? You said it was 39?
39.
Okay. How many properties are above that limit per your modeling at the receptor here? Do you know?
We went over this the other day. There were 5 at 41, and I think you mentioned there were 10 between 40 and 41, so...
Well, it's 40.5 and 40.9. But I mean, you would agree with me. I think if we went through the list, it's a significant number. In fact, I think it's almost all the receptors on Part 16B, or on Exhibit 16, or a majority of them at least.
Okay. Could be 10, 20, 30, something of that magnitude.
Okay. going to show you Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 16B again. And we'll just go to the let's go to the last chart, just for reference sake. And that's the one that's real small, so I apologize. And 16B, the last chart, shows 108 receptors, correct?
Yes.
It's hard for me to tell, but I don't see any receptors of those 118 under 39. Well, I'm sorry, there's about 5 of them. They're under 39.1. Correct?
Yes, I scan it. I see mainly 39s and 40s.
Okay.
I see one that's under.
There's
Your point is made.
There's a handful maybe that are under, maybe 1, maybe 5. I don't know what the number is, but
Right?
a great majority are over 39. You would agree to that, correct?
Yes.
The inability to sleep, even where it does not reach the levels of the nighttime decibel levels, can still be in violation of the Illinois Pollution Control Ordinance, correct?
Would this relate to your noise pollution and unreasonably interfering with enjoyment of life?
Yeah.
If someone claims that they're having that unreasonable interference with their enjoyment of life, and they can make the claim, yes, regardless of the levels, it's not a good point.
Did you model the noise emissions at the Harkey home running your ISO model?
Yes.
And what'd you come up with?
Again, 41 in 1,000 hertz.
Was it 41.0 or was it something above 41?
I don't remember the decimal numbers.
Okay. And just for the record, clear, because I'm not sure I was very clear in my question, that was 41, 1,000 hertz.
Yeah.
At nighttime levels, correct?
Yes. That would stand for all of this, yes.
And that's my fault, not yours, if I understand. Did you model the Harkey house for the approval of the wind turbines at college, or is this a model you did afterwards?
It's primarily a model we did here to validate our Pleasant Ridge model.
Okay, so you didn't do it for the approval process, you did it after it was already in.
Yeah, I didn't do it for the Cal Ridge approval process. I wasn't involved with that.
Okay. Showing you as the markers, UCLC Exhibit 151. Have you ever seen this paper by Dr. Schomer and John Edrick and others?
Others, yes, I have.
Okay. And again, this was by Dr. Schomer, and it's entitled A Theory to Explain Some Physiological Effects of the Infrasonic Emissions at Some Wind Farm Sites, correct?
Yes.
And it was published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in March of 2015, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I think she can't take down the money, so I apologize if you could just say that.
Yes. February 2015.
Okay, I looked at the bottom and it said March 2015, so I think it was actually published.
Yeah, correct. Fair enough.
Okay. We're splitting hairs.
Yes. It's intensive debate.
This journal, we would agree, is a well-respected journal, correct?
Absolutely.
And it's a, have you published in this journal?
In part, some of the work I did in Oregon was published in the ASA conference proceedings, but not in the journal itself.
Okay. We would agree this is not a pro-wind journal, correct?
No, this has nothing to do with the wind industry.
And this article was peer reviewed, correct? Because you can see the different dates it was submitted and things like that.
Does it have anything about a review on here?
Well, it says it was received at the top of the first page, 20th November 2013, revised October 1, 2014, and accepted February 4th, 2015.
It was accepted. Yeah, I don't know if that necessarily means peer reviewed.
Okay, you don't know if it wasn't peer reviewed, correct?
I don't see anything about, people reviewing here, independently verifying any of this.
Okay, and you don't see that, well, we'll leave that alone for now. Dr. Schomer says they're on page 1364, and I think it's actually highlighted for you, because I don't know how to delete the letter. First full paragraph. Most residents do not hear the wind turbine sound. Noise annoyance is not an issue. The issue is physiological responses that result from the very low frequency infrasound, and it appears to trigger motion sickness mainly in some of those who are susceptible to it. Again, this was written by your well-respected Dr. Schomer, correct?
Yes.
I apologize for the delay. I have one last area to deal with, which is Cape Bridgewater, but I really want to just make sure I haven't missed anything in what he said in the last couple of minutes. To your knowledge, even though Dr. Schomer and others have lauded this Cape Bridgewater study, no one has ever said that the levels, the noise level in the study, the noise levels out of those wind turbines surpass or are above the noise emission standards, correct?
Cape Bridgewater you're talking about now? Did the levels exceed?
No, my question is, I'm not trying to interrupt you, but
No, please clarify.
I can keep going back. But not did the levels exceed. None of these papers in Hayes Exhibit 2 say or imply that, in their opinion, the noise levels exceeded the nighttime 41 decibels or any other standard that they're aware of, correct?
I don't believe they did, no.
Again, at Hayes Exhibit 2, you stated that you did not know if Rand looked at the data, correct?
Yeah, I don't know how he can come out and say, thanks for proving correlation when, not my opinion, there was no correlation to be found anywhere.
Okay, but that wasn't my question. My question is, you said you did not know if Rand looked at the data. That was your statement, correct?
No, I don't know if he looked at that.
You don't know if he did, you don't know if he didn't.
I don't know how we could have.
Okay? But you know that someone who you used to work with and respect still wrote that letter, correct?
Paul wrote comments about Cape Bridgewater that he wrote, yes.
And I'm talking about Rob Rand at this point. Rob Rand used to work for
someone I
Rob.
respected.
You don't respect Rob Rand? I think earlier you said you respected him and his Rand.
I'm losing that respect for Rob after some of the letters he's written to and about me, yes.
To and about me? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
You have to say yes.
Yes.
And when you got involved in this business, you were at the engineering firm that Mr. Rand and Mr. Ambrose were at,
Mr.
correct?
Chairman, we're going way beyond rebuttal at this point.
This is his opinion of what Rand's opinion. I think he mentioned Rand, I didn't.
We need to make sure we stay focused on what he presented in rebuttal.
Which is that he said he did not know if Rand looked at the data. He then said, because he was talking about this particular letter, and then he went on to say, I don't know if I respect him anymore. I think I have the ability to then ask, didn't you used to work for him or work with him?
And frankly, apart from the fact that it's beyond the scope of rebuttal, these questions were already asked back in January.
No, they weren't. They were asked about Sean, not Rand.
No, when you asked them about when they worked together at Stone and Webster.
Okay?
All right, let's go ahead and just, right, it is beyond our scope of rebuttal. You can ask questions specifically to Rand that Mr. Hankard has alluded to, but we've already discussed when he worked for him and all those details.
In Hayes Exhibit 2, you disagree with Schomer and Hessler's opinion, correct?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, do you have any understanding or belief that they were paid for those opinions?
I have no knowledge of whether or not they were paid.
However, you're being paid for these opinions here today, correct?
I'm being paid for my work here.
Okay. And Ambrose said that Cooper did a good job. Isn't that what you said?
These are Ambrose words you're saying?
That's what, yeah, I think you said that.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations. Find an actual I commend you for pursuing scientific truth. Thank you. Best wishes.
You talked about that criteria are based on outside, not inside, correct?
As in the Illinois Pollution Control Board?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you talked about there's a 15 decibel difference indoor versus outdoor with, I think, the windows open, you said, correct?
Right.
The Cooper report and the Schomer, etc. opinions in Hayes 2, they're not based on DBA, correct? They're not saying that it's the DBA that's so loud that it's causing this, are they?
They don't explicitly say it's not about DBA. I see, for example, with Rand here talking about the WTS level, which is basically the infrasonic level. So Rand appears to be referring to the infrasonic level.
But in fact, Schomer is referring to everything but infrasound level. But they're not referring to noise that you can hear, are they?
Well, Cape Bridgewater didn't measure anything that they could hear, so I guess they would have to be.
So that was the point of Cape Bridgewater, correct? To measure things below what you could hear.
No, I mean, the very stated reason for Cape Bridgewater was, again, starting with the diaries and trying to find out if anything correlated with the diaries to explain why these people had these sensations.
And in this case, the determination in their opinion was stuff that they couldn't hear, correct? It was noise, or was something going on that they couldn't have heard causing these quote sensations.
Well, Cooper has, again, theorized that it's this infrasonic level, and the levels they measured were below the hearing threshold. So, yes, it's about something that people can't hear.
As did Schomer in UCL State Exhibit 154, correct?
154?
Yeah, the paper you just read. That's what he said, right?
Is 154 Hayes Exhibit 2?
I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong, I got so many numbers here. It is,
151 perhaps?
I think it's 150, yeah, it's 151, I apologize, it's my mistake.
Well, yeah, and again, you know, the title of so much paper is theory. And he's saying the purpose of the paper is to provide a foundation upon which infrasound can be investigated. I mean, he's not, it's a theory.
And the Cape Bridgewater study was investigating that it's a very similar theory, correct?
That yes, they're both investigating or talking about infrasound.
You said that the Hayes PowerPoint discussed amplitude modulation, and you said, it was your opinion that amplitude modulation does not matter because the noise was actually infrasound and not dBA, correct?
Well, what I said and certainly meant to say, and we can check the record, but until you can hear it, you can't tell if it's modulated.
Okay, but you can still, but Mr. Hayes was talking about things that you could hear at the time. He was actually talking about dBAs at a higher level in that PowerPoint, correct?
I don't know if he explicitly said what he was talking about.
Okay.
He just mentioned amplitude modulation.
So you just only talked about infrasound when you were disputing that, though, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't talk about sounds you could hear up in the 35, 40 level.
Right.
Okay. The Wisconsin Public Service Commission decision, that's currently up on appeal, correct? It's actually in the court system right now.
On the Highland One project?
The one you talked about with land inclusive.
Yes, that's on appeal.
So that's not a final decision by any stretch, correct?
Well, the Public Service Commission issued their final decision approving the permit.
Okay, but as lawyers, we would not consider that a final decision.
Well, they issued a final order.
Okay, which is now being appealed. You said you double-checked the Cal Ridge, or you double-checked your models here, excuse me, with two other models, correct?
Yes.
Those other two modeling results have not been provided to the zoning board of appeals yet.
No, I do not believe so.
Okay. You talked about the Knox case, which is, if you have it, you can find it, get it number faster than I can. Oh, it's 228, I believe. Pleasant Ridge 228. Is that correct?
You said Knox?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You talked about the fact that the Knox case measured at the pond, and the pond is not a house and not Class A, correct?
Correct.
In the Knox case, no one measured at the yard, did they? On the other side of the pond.
I would have to review to double check that.
Okay, well, that's fine. We'll be citing this to the board at the appropriate time, so that's fine. You said you didn't use the measurements during harvest months, or utilize the measurements during harvest months at Cow Ridge. Remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
And that was because of harvesting equipment being used, correct?
Yes, it was because of our inability to separate the turbine noise from the harvest.
Were you having that same problem at midnight?
Yes,
There were still people were harvesting at midnight, 2, 3, 4 in the morning?
all night long, yes.
All night long, the entire project near there.
There were distant harvesting operations going on at times 24 hours a day.
How
I
distant?
was at the site, on site, and I witnessed this.
How distant?
Well, there was, occasionally they would come right up and do the field right next to the measurement location, and occasionally it could be up to a mile away.
So, and how often did you notice that at 3 in the morning?
I don't recall exactly how often it was at 3 in the morning, but it was evident in much of the data.
How about between 1 and 5, 1 a.m. and 5 a.m.? Were you there at some point when you actually saw people harvesting?
Yes,
How often?
I was not, like I said, I was there every 2 weeks or so.
And those 2 weeks you were there you were there 24 hours?
No.
How often were you there? How long were you there when you just came by in those 2 weeks, every 2 weeks?
I would come by and download the data, which takes hours. I was probably on site for 2 days.
2 days over how many visits?
Oh, there were, 4.5 months every 2 weeks,
So 9?
at least.
Okay, let's say 10. So 48 hours, you were there 48 hours over a 10-week period. But the 10-week period doesn't include the harvest, right? Because you were doing it 3.5 months that you...
No, we kept measuring the whole time. We never stopped measuring. It was just a question when it came time to analyze the data in the heart of the harvest season, which was early to mid-October in 2013, and it largely wrapped up by the end of October.
I think your testimony was that you measured for 3.5 months, correct?
3.5 months. September, October, November, and part of August. Sorry, 3.5 months.
And of that 3.5 months, you were there 48 hours. So let's say 3.5 months conservatively would be...
48 hours each time I went.
So you were there for 48 straight hours?
Well, not straight hours, but you go down to the site, you download data, you go back to the hotel, you come out at night.
Okay, so how often were you there in that 48-hour time period? How many hours?
I was on site probably 10, 12 hours a day, so.
Okay. And how many of those time periods were in the harvest time?
Say 3 to 4.
And how long is the harvest that you deleted?
Well, we witnessed it, again, it's by looking at the data and seeing the frequency that we know is from harvesting equipment. Because we can tell, because when the harvesting equipment drove right up to the meters, the levels spiked, we got to see what the signature was, and then we were therefore able to identify that signature in other data.
Okay, so you would see that it came up there during that time period, and you would get rid of that period, but instead of just getting rid of those areas where you heard it, you got rid of the entire 4, 5, 6 weeks?
We reviewed, all of the data was included in the review.
But you discarded how many weeks?
We didn't discard anything. There was just a period of time, it was probably 3 weeks, where the levels were clearly influenced by harvesting and we couldn't separate it from the turbines.
And you tried to separate it all 24 hours during those 3 weeks and couldn't do it, or just couldn't do it at certain time periods?
We looked at every single hour of the data.
So you're telling me that for those 3 weeks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you couldn't distinguish the harvest from the wind turbines?
No. What we did is we took, say out of those 3 weeks, maybe, keep in mind only the turbines are only operating a certain amount of time, and it's obviously we're only looking at night. And then the level is not always above the threshold. We were only concerned with those levels that are above the threshold. That's what we're concerned. So when we looked at those hours, however many that boiled down to, we couldn't separate the two for that data set.
Okay, were there time periods that you could separate the two during those 3 weeks?
Yes.
But you didn't utilize any of those, correct?
Well, I mean, those would be below the limits.
But we don't have that anymore.
All of the data is in the report, every single hour that was measured. Every graph, every day.
You said, in response to the questions about Dr. Ambrose's statement, you said he said Cal Ridge had to reduce the data to charts and graphs or something like that, right?
Yes.
You said they had to do that.
Yes.
And that's exactly what the Cape Bridgewater study did too, correct?
Sure, yes.
Let's go to Cape Bridgewater. You have that handy in front of you?
I do not have a complete document. Do you have a Cape Bridgewater?
No, I can give it to you. And all I have is, I don't have all the thousands of pages of exhibits.
Yeah, I just have a few.
I got it.
I think it got left behind on Monday.
Okay. It's Hayes exhibit number 1 for the record. And obviously that's, I think there were about 12 appendixes. That's just the actual report, not all the appendixes for the record. And that's what has been admitted into evidence. Mr. Hankard, I will say that. You have said that one of the criticisms you have seen of your methodology is that low-frequency noise travels better than ISO predicts, correct?
Is that noise from wind turbines propagates differently than noise from other, say, point sources. That's the criticism.
As it relates to low-frequency noise, correct?
Well, that was not my statement, no. I would relate it to infrasound, low frequency person.
Well, it was low-frequency noise, that's your statement, correct? That's okay, I can read it to you. Somewhere in here I have that transcript, I apologize. So it's got a little out of order since we started here. Counsel, how about if I just cite you to the page and you can tell me if I'm quoting this wrong?
Sure.
Transcript, November 18th, 2014, page 151.
November 18th. What page?
151. And the question is in there, you have said...
Almost there.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, I apologize.
No problem. What line are we at?
You know, that's what I don't have, if you want, I can spend a few minutes.
Just start reading it, I'll find it.
He said that one of the criticisms he has seen of his methodology is that low-frequency noise travels better than ISO predicts. You find that, Mike?
I've seen criticisms that low frequency noise travels better than ISO predicts.
Was that your testimony, Mr. Hankard?
Yes.
Okay. I'm assuming Mr. Blazer is lying. He isn't trying to mess you up. You said in the first hearing...
Do you want me to read the rest of it? Or just,
it's up to you, I don't care. I mean, I know it's a long answer, so I was just trying to make it short.
It was just 2 sentences. Again, we're going to compare our results to real world conditions to test that.
Okay. You said in the first hearing that one advantage you have, quote, when I'm working for Invenergy, another turbine farm developer, I have access to the data that tells me when the turbines are operating and when they aren't. If you're an acoustician working for an opposition group, you often don't have that data, end quote. Do you remember saying that?
I do.
Okay. And they don't have that data because the wind turbine companies and their experts don't give it to them all the time, correct?
I don't know why, but either they
Cooper, however, had this type of information for the Cape Bridge Watershed.
He did.
And he wasn't working for an opposition group, was he?
No, he was working for the turbine operator.
He was actually working for the turbine operator when he came up with these conclusions, correct?
Right.
And you don't have any information that this study done by Cooper was not an independent analysis, do you?
Do I have any reason to believe it wasn't an independent analysis? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no reason to believe it.
Okay. And in fact, Pacific Hydro provided unlimited access to the wind farm to undertake measurements that could assist in the study, correct?
Yes.
And the study dealt with 3 houses located between 650 meters to 1,600 meters from the nearest turbine, correct? And it's not a memory. Let's go to page 1 of the executive summary, page I guess it is. Romanet 1, I guess, is what I was once taught.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was it? 650 to 1,600 meters, yes.
Okay. So we're talking approximately, how many? 650 meters would be close to 2,000 feet.
Right.
And here the closest setback is about 1,600 feet.
On a Pleasant Ridge project?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then at the bottom of the executive summary page, Romanet 1, it says, following consultation with residents were asked to record perceived noise impacts, vibration impacts, and other disturbances which for the purpose of the study have been labeled sensation. Sensation includes headache, pressure in the head, ears or chest, ringing in the ears, heart racing, or a sensation of heaviness, correct?
Yes.
Cooper admits, does he not, that there were times where other instances of high severity of disturbance were not fitting above the 4 scenarios that you talked about.
Yeah, he says that very thing.
Okay. So he knew that. He recognized that, correct?
Yes.
He's not trying to hide it, correct?
Right.
Okay. And you talked about this being the 4 things, I think you said something about it's pretty much the whole gamut of the wind turbine operation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that. So we have when the turbines were seeking to start, correct?
Right.
We have an increase in power in the order of 20%, correct?
Right.
Decrease in power in the order of 20%.
Right.
So we have everything between an increase in power of 20% and a decrease in power of 20%. That's not covered in here, correct? That's not one of his times he found a sensation, is it?
Did you repeat that?
Yeah, that's awfully worded. I don't know if I'll be able to do it any better, but I'll try. Let's do this. There is a time from when the turbine starts to the increase in power in the order of 20%, where there is a gap in between them. Correct?
Well, there would be times when it's not going up at the rate of 20%.
And there's also times when it's not decreasing at the rate of 20%.
Sure.
Okay? And there's also times when the turbines were not operating at maximum power and the wind increased above 12 meters per second, correct? That's his 4th scenario?
Well, they were operating. You said not. They were operating at maximum power and an increase.
Okay. Yeah, but there's times when that's not occurring.
Sure.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are clearly times when one of these 4 scenarios is not happening, correct? At a wind turbine?
There could be times, yes.
Could be, or there will be.
I'm not sure there will be.
He goes on Romanet 4 to say at the top, by including narrowband analysis in the description of the acoustic environment, the study confirms that the infrasound obtained in a wind farm affected environment is different to that in a natural acoustic environment, correct?
Yes.
So he's realizing that this is not always noise in his mind.
Well, what he's realizing is that there are these, right at what's called the late pass frequency and harmonics, and other researchers are finding the same thing.
Okay. That are not seen at 39, 40, 41 decibels, correct? at 1,000?
No, this is all between 1 and 5 hertz.
Perfect. And he goes on to say, going at 5, at the end of the executive summary, third full paragraph, about 3/4 of the way down. Reliance upon manufacturer's data does not always cover the entire spectrum of concern. That's his opinion, correct?
That's his opinion, yeah.
Okay. One of your criticisms of the Cape Bridgewater or Dr. Cooper's, or Mr. Cooper's study, I don't know if it was Dr. I apologize, were that the noise bottomed out at inside the home, noise levels were so slow, or were so low that that's a problem, correct?
Yeah, probably in the sense their meters couldn't measure that well.
Okay. But his study, as we talked about, isn't saying that it's noise that's causing the problem, correct?
I don't know what his study is saying is causing the problem.
But he doesn't say it's noise.
Well, he says they can't correlate it to the measured noise levels.
Okay. But he's still saying he's finding a correlation, correct?
He says he finds, let's use his words, back to Roman numeral 2, right above the 4 conditions under which he thinks could be the issue. The study found a pattern. That's his word.
So
Pattern of high severity with those operating conditions.
Okay, and one of the reasons you don't think there's a pattern is because there are times when people are saying they have a high severity of a sensation, and it's not, there's no wind turbine operation, correct?
Right, as well as times when the plant is changing and they don't.
Okay, and there are also times when I have a headache, and I probably give one to about 3/4 of the people in the room tonight, that there is no wind turbine unit, correct?
Sure.
Mr. Hankard, thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, just real quick, let's see how many, just a show of hands, how many individuals might have some questions for Mr. Hankard in the audience? Okay, let's take 5 minutes worth of break, give our court reporter a 5-minute break, and we'll get going just as soon as we can after that, and we should be able to get through everybody, but we're still gonna, Mr. Hankard, I hope to get you out of here tonight.
Whoa, let me get there.
I got it.
There's another one in there, I promise.
than one.
What?
Take more than one.
Well, like that. Is it inappropriate for me to ask to go to a venue where the microphones work so people can hear?
You can do
Yeah. I can have mine. Yeah, I have to run.
I have no.
Get it done, go home.
John's not here, so neither do I.
All right, we can go ahead and head back. We'll be going in. I have some questions out there. Mr. Hayes, why don't we take some of your questions first? Elena has a microphone, so we should be able to hear good tonight.
They can't
Way
hear.
out there.
They can't hear him at all. Even sitting in the front row.
I had a hard time with him too. All right, Mr. Hayes.
John Hayes. This won't take long, I don't have too much. There was, I'd like to get a little clarification on some of the things that I'm not fully understanding about the numbers that were calculated by the ISO model for the Pleasant Ridge, and you're saying you have faith in those based on the measured values from the Cal Ridge study, am I correct?
Correct.
And you are basing that, I'm guessing here, you'll have to correct me, on model predicted numbers for the Cal Ridge?
Correct.
And is that data available online, anything that I can look at?
If I may, Mr. Hayes, that's one of, the calorie study is in the record, it's one of our exhibits, the entire study.
Okay, thank you.
If you want, after we finish, I can tell you exactly.
I just, you know, in case I wanted to look at it, because you're basically using an equation that you put numbers into, and one of them is certainly going to be distance.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how you can take, you know, how you were, how did you determine the locations to use for the predicting numbers you put into your model for the calculation ones that you predicted that you compared with the measured ones? How did you obtain those? That's what I don't understand.
How did I obtain the distances?
Well, just how did you go about making sure they were identical? That the, you know, you're saying that, you know, because you had a limited locations in the calorie range you measured, as far as where you measured them, you didn't do the whole wind farm.
No, we measured it at 3 specific points.
Right, so that's kind of where I'm wondering, how did you go about calculating those predicted ones?
Well, we can determine the locations of our measurement points using a GPS given coordinates. And then we know the coordinates of the turbines. So from those two, we can calculate the distances between our measurement points and the turbines.
And when you got your numbers, they were extremely close?
They were, as we've discussed, they were 2 decibels over. Sometimes it was 4 decibels over.
But generally less than 1 decibel difference?
Well, no, I mean, like I said, it's a 2 decibel difference.
Oh, I'm thinking tenths, forgive me.
No.
No. So you were talking about 2 decibels there?
Right.
Okay. So you did basically use the distance from those turbines to the microphones. You basically did that in your model process. You replicated that as far as your model, as to where the microphones, prime 1 and prime 2, were located.
Right.
Okay. That's kind of what I wanted to know. Second thing that I heard you say that you thought that using a point source of the resonance was more accurate than a contour map.
Right.
So if to make a contour map, say of a wind farm, would it to do the more points that you would use in the contour map in your calculation would probably be a more desirable idea?
Right, yeah, you can set that in the software, the density of your points.
Okay. And, you know, and you basically you're using the exact same equation. You're putting different numbers into it, but you're calculating a lot of different decibels on property in the wind farm.
When you're doing a contour
Yes.
calculation, yeah, you're just predicting at points, just all kinds of points, and then the line gets interpolated between the points.
So, I mean, maybe I'm splitting here, maybe we have a different opinion on the word accuracy. You know, accuracy would have more along the lines to me of sending figures and things. And if you're using the same equation, you're going to have the same accuracy coming out. It's going to go out, it's going to spit out a number.
Mr. Hayes, just
Oh,
remember, rebuttal, not your opinion of accuracy. Questions regarding that? Over.
what I was getting to was just to your comment that you thought one point was more accurate than a contour map, which is consequence. That's what I was just trying to get across, that, you know, that.
But what you get out of a contour map is the line. It's not the points, it's the line. And the line is an interpolation between between the lines. That was my point.
Well, a lot of contour maps are, sometimes they just show color backgrounds. And
Question. Remember, question.
Yeah, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I think I'll do this, just, I made my point, I think. Okay, thank
It's
you.
okay, I'm just trying to get you to ask the questions.
I understand what you're saying, and it's not that important to keep you here later, it's too late in the day. So we'll let someone else ask questions.
Mr. Hayes, for the record, the California Ridge Noise Report is Pleasant Ridge Exhibit 48.
Thank you.
All right, if you guys some other questions, and we already do have a few.
No, you might be. Hello. I guess I had a few questions. I assume are there instruments to measure for infrasound?
Yeah, I mean, your standard microphone, sound level meter will measure infrasound, provided it is rated to go down below that level of frequency. Most sound level meters might go from 4 or 10 hertz up to 10,000. So you would need to make sure that the microphone that you're using and the meter is all rated to go all the way down to, say, 10 hertz. So the equipment's not really any different, it just has to be better.
What do wind turbines produce infrasound?
Yes.
Would those instruments be able to measure, I don't know how old they were, I guess, the infrasound level of wind turbines?
Which instrument?
Whatever instruments used to measure infrasound.
On Cal Ridge, the lowest, and it's published in the report, that those meters that we used only went down to, I think, 4. So not all the way down to 1.5.
And what do the turbines usually produce?
Well, the turbines will produce the sound across the spectrum, all the way from a fraction of a hertz up to 10,000 hertz. Yes, produced.
Is it true that infrasound gets louder indoors, like in-home?
That was a comment made in one of the presentations. I believe they used the term resonance. And no, every study, including Cape Bridgewater, shows that the infrasound levels inside a home are less than outside a home.
That's infrasound.
Infrasound.
Okay.
All noise levels, but infrasound also.
Did you measure for infrasound levels in California Ridge?
No, that was not part of our scope.
And you mentioned you measure during a certain time of year during harvest. You have to take, well, you know what I'm saying, I guess. Did you ever try to measure when there was no harvesting going on?
Well, certainly. I mean, in August and September and November, there was little if any harvesting going on. It was primarily October.
Okay, what about in the wintertime? We had some testify that it was louder, turbines are louder in the winter. Would that be accurate?
No, I have no reason to believe that they're louder in the winter. I've got a project where I've been measuring for 4 years and I don't see any seasonal variation to speak of.
And can you measure simultaneously, with your audible or inaudible sound, the load or power output the wind turbine is producing? Can you have that data to be simultaneous?
Yes, that data can be put together. Sure.
And your data at California Ridge, did it have, was the power output at full power, I guess?
Yeah, what we published in the report was the speed of the nearest turbines and then the power output of the whole plant. That's what we put in the report.
I guess I'm not asking about the speed of the rotor. I'm asking about the individual power output.
That was
the ones we measured.
That was not in the report. The individual turbine power output was not in the report.
And there's no way to get that. No.
Well, it exists.
And also, I had a question on measuring. You mentioned that, I was a little confused. You measure sound from the hub pipe of the windmill wind turbine?
No, we didn't measure 5 feet off the ground.
I'm sorry, I guess what do you measure? You said something about the hub height.
Wind speed maybe?
Wind speed, okay.
That's measured at hub height and at ground level.
Okay, and that would that affect the decibel level?
Well, I mean, the hub height wind speed simply really relates just to how fast the turbines can spin, and that is what dictates how loud it is.
Okay. So it'd probably, I guess what I'm asking is, at Pleasant Ridge, I guess the rotor diameter is a certain size, and the hub height is a certain size. I think these are pretty big rotors. Would that affect?
And let's be careful here. This has already been previously testified to.
Well, I guess I was.
So rebuttal and what he presented during rebuttal.
As I guess you talk about measuring different points. I'm strong, and I'm sure you've measured. If you measured current noise levels at any property, real noise levels.
On Pleasant Ridge?
Yes. Okay. Do you have any idea of what you think it might be? I guess, is that what your model is trying to show?
No, the model does not, I mean, because what's here today is not wind turbines. I mean, it's wind and traffic and overhead airplanes.
So it would be zero if you just talk about turbines, there's no turbines.
Right, there's no turbine present now.
Okay. And some of them would be 41 on your models. I guess, in your opinion, is it okay to impose an increase of 40 decibels on any property?
Well, it's not.
Hold on. Not a fair question.
Okay. Okay, I guess that was my question. Thank you.
All right, who else has some questions? Label.
Can I sit down here?
Yeah, you're welcome to sit down. I'm going to remind you the same as I reminded the ask 2 questions. Make sure it's rebuttal based.
Exactly.
It's on.
It's working.
Yes, I thought long and hard about the questions I've been asking. I'm going to have to do a lot of this during the survey now. The first question, you said there's a 15 decibel reduction inside the house, right?
From outside and inside, yes.
At what frequency?
Those are referring to dBA levels, so that would be the entire, kind of sum of the entire frequency spectrum.
Okay. And then you said the really only difference was whether the windows are open or not?
Well, the difference in the published WHO numbers are depending on windows open or closed.
And would insulation or the soundproofing of the house affect that number, and how would it affect that number?
Yes, absolutely. The thickness of the walls, the amount of insulation, whether or not it's stucco or wood, all these things come into play. Double pane windows, etc.
Okay. So at Ted Hartke's house, when you were measuring 45, 46 dBA outside on his property during the California Ridge study, so you're saying inside his house it would be 30 dBA roughly?
Yes,
If I may, Mr. Chairman, first of all, he did testify that he was measuring at Mr. Hartke's property line.
That is correct. He referred to the Hartke model as a similar property that was not the Hartke residence.
Okay. So another thing you said tonight that I didn't quite get, you said that meeting legislative levels or IPCD levels doesn't mean, could you say that statement that you said earlier? I think it was a Blazer queried you about it, and it was something like, just because you meet levels doesn't mean you're going to have health issues, noise complaints.
Mr. Lucan's asked that question, it's in the record.
I think what you may be referring to, Mr. Chairman, is the Levenfeld Burger study that.
It's in the record.
Yeah, it's already in the record.
All right, it's already been asked and answered.
I guess what I was going to say was, you said that there wasn't, because you know the IPCB limits. Well, we'll connect that. Okay. On the sound contours, that's one of your complaints that my model wasn't accurate, I guess. You said it was because the interpolation, correct?
Well, I don't know if that's the reason for the differences, it's just that.
No, I mean, you said that sound contours were not accurate because of the interpolation.
I'm saying this, sound, yeah, a contour line is an interpolation between 2 points.
Okay. Okay, this is my exhibit here that I submitted earlier.
What's the number on that?
This would be the 3A.
Show you exhibit 3A.
Just like the sound contours here was showing you points. Okay, can you show me where I drew the line that's interpolated in the sound contours?
Well, be the line that goes between the 2 different colors.
Right, there's no line there, there's no line going. These colors are each pixel. I calculated the volume, so you check out. Now he's still playing. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yes. If you were going to make sound contours, how would you do it?
I would use the software model that we have that would do, assuming what yours did, which is predict a bunch of points and then interpolate between the points.
And when you say interpolate, you mean you're to draw lines on the contour?
Yeah, usually you tell to draw a 40 dB contour line or 35 or whatever.
Right. So, back to this figure. On this map right here, in the red area, where's the data interpolated? Like when I calculated this point here, where did that get interpolated?
I don't know. I assume your program, again, produce noise levels at a matrix a number of different points.
At every pixel.
Every pixel, okay.
And there's no interpolation.
Right, but once you cross from red to yellow, how do you designate where that boundary is?
It's not designated, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Slater, I'm here for testifying again.
Okay, anyway. Okay, now, you said I calculated one number of 31, 39 something, and you calculated 41.
Right.
What, was that for Hartke's house or for the location of Prime 2?
Prime 2, I believe you said on the California Ridge, you predicted 39.
Right, I predicted 39.16 at the center of the Hartke residence. And you're saying it should be 41?
Well, my 41 is at the Prime 2 location.
Okay, just to go back and when you did your California Ridge compliance study, did you calculate the ISO prediction at the points of Prime 1 and Prime 2?
Yes, that's what I'm referring to when I say I predicted a 41.
Okay. So you say mine is, that's 2 decibels lower than yours?
Right.
Okay, switch gears real quick here. So if you say the house is the Class A land, correct? Is what you're saying?
Yes.
And the entire house is Class A, leased, correct?
Yes, the house.
And so the land outside of your house, like your yard, the driveway, what class is it?
That's not listed, so I guess it would be unclassified.
Okay, so then what are the sound restrictions on that?
There are, if it's an unclassified land, there are no sound restrictions.
Okay.
That's it?
All right. Anybody else in the audience with questions? Anybody else out there? All right. It's back to us again. We have any? I had two. I'll be really quick. All right. As I looked at one of these exhibits, I just had a general question. All limitations were two, basically, as low as 2 hertz you could measure with your meters. You referred to 2 hertz as your bottom limit.
4, I believe.
Or 4, okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. The graphs that we've seen earlier previously submitted, be it from you or elsewhere, with the hertz and the charts, as hertz decreased, decibels at the same level increased, decreased?
Increased, gentlemen. Yeah.
They do, okay. That was my first question. Okay. To the per key model scenario that you built. I remember clearly the Harkey testimony, and he showed a picture of the tree house. And the reason I asked that is the model location of similar acoustical variety with maybe trees in the background, and acoustically is it the same amphitheater setting that you may have? Or is it a flat piece of land with no buildings or instruments to possibly bounce the sound around?
Within the model, you mean?
Where you're taking measurements from, since you're not on the property?
Well, I mean, we had direct line of sight to the nearest turbine. So there was nothing that would reduce the noise, for example, between that turbine and our measurement. Harkey residence, I believe there was a stand of trees between that residence. So that might reduce it a little bit, but we generally don't take any account for trees. So I mean, it was very, very similar to the locations in terms of distance, in terms of their view of the turbine, elevation.
Could trees acoustically provide a background that would actually hold sound in, or actually, let's say, bounce sound backwards towards their residence?
I mean, if you have trees between you and a source, generally speaking, it's going to reduce the noise. It's not going to.
Okay, but let's go in reverse that.
Could it reflect the noise?
Yeah.
That's not at all my understanding of the acoustics of this. No, we never. No. You do not get a reflection of noise on the trees.
Zero effect.
Oh, it's never zero. I mean, but you know, the rule of thumb is don't even take the correction of everything. The trees are going to block some noise, and it's a very small amount, and we just don't even deal with that because trees can have these and then they can lose their leaves. So, I mean, could there be a minute amount of reflection that occurs? Yes, there could be. But again, we don't take the correction either way.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from the board? County staff? Motion to recess. Actually, let me before we go over still session. Our next meeting is May 7th. It's at 7 o'clock in this location. 6:30, we have a meeting prior. We'll be in the back room. We'll come forward for the meeting at 7. All right, that motion to recess.
I make that.
It's a motion. Can I get a second?
This was the only one I didn't.
Houston seconds. All in favor? Opposed?